Fuck your fate. Naruto got exploded, stabbed, lightning fried, and still evolved into a walking apocalypse. He outgrew the 10 tails, grounded Kaguya's ash bones, and made the whole shinobi world his bitch. Absolute unkillable Chad energy. This is peak I adapt, you die.
The warehouse went white. 14 explosive tags, military grade, stolen from the Konoha Armory, detonated simultaneously in a ring formation around a 7-year-old boy standing barefoot on concrete. The shockwave blew the walls outward, showering the surrounding district in splintered wood and superheated dust. The roof lifted clean off its supports before collapsing inward, burying the detonation zone under a mountain of burning debris. 3 Root Amb operatives observed from a nearby rooftop, their porcelain masks angled downward toward the inferno, waiting for the thermals to dissipate, waiting for confirmation. The target, asset designation Nine-Tails vessel, priority elimination, should have been vapor. Should have been red mist spread across 20 square meters of scorched earth. Should have been a closed file on Danzo Shimura's desk by morning. They watched the fire. They watched the smoke curl upward in black pillars against the evening sky. And then the smoke moved wrong. It bent inward instead of rising, pulled toward a central point like the air itself was being devoured. Something breathed inside that furnace. Something inhaled the flames. The lead operative signaled with 2 fingers. Descend. Confirm. All 3 dropped from the rooftop and landed in the rubble ring surrounding the blast zone. The heat was oppressive, blistering paint off the surrounding buildings and turning puddles to steam. Through the haze, they could see the concrete floor of the warehouse, cracked, molten at the edges, glowing a dull orange. And at the center of it, a shape. Small, child-sized, but wrong in every proportion that mattered. The flesh had been stripped completely from the skeleton, and the skeleton itself had been fractured in 40 places by the concussive force. That much was visible. What was also visible, what made the lead operative's hand freeze halfway to his weapon pouch, was the fact that it was rebuilding itself. Tendons snaked out from bone like ivy climbing a wall, red and glistening, weaving around fracture points and pulling them together with audible cracks. Muscle fiber braided itself in thick ropes over the ribcage, but the color was wrong. The tissue growing back was black, hardened. It looked like volcanic rock being poured over a scaffold of calcium and iron. The skin that sealed over it carried a texture like carbon plating, heat-resistant, layered, fibrous in a way that human epidermis had never been. The boy's skull reconstructed last, bone plates sliding together like tectonic shelves, and the eyes that opened in those sockets were the wrong shade of blue, deeper, colder, like light refracting through glacial ice. Naruto Uzumaki stood up from his own ashes and rolled his neck, producing a sound like stone grinding against stone. The youngest Anbu, a recent graduate of root conditioning, 16 years old, designated Crane, took 1 step forward and drove his tanto directly through the boy's sternum. Full force, full penetration, the blade punching through the black tissue and out the back. A killing blow on any living creature in the known world. Naruto looked down at the blade in his chest the way a man looks at a hangnail. His muscles clamped. The tissue around the wound solidified instantaneously, compressing inward with enough force to crack the blade along its central spine. The steel fractured inside his body, the lower half clattering to the ground, while the upper half remained trapped in a prison of calcified flesh. Crane tried to pull his arm back. He failed. Naruto's chest had grown around the entry point like a biological vice. "I feel the damage," Naruto said, and his voice came out wrong, lower than a child's voice should be. Resonant in frequencies that made the eardrums itch and the inner ear lose its bearings. "I analyze it. I overcome it." Crane screamed. The lead operative charged, running through hand seals for a fire release technique. He never completed the sequence. Naruto's forearm split along the ulna, the bone pushing outward through the skin and elongating into blades, dense osseous, edged like obsidian where they tapered to a point. He moved with the speed of something that had just learned it could never die and therefore feared nothing. His right arm swept horizontally and Crane's mask split in two, along with the skull behind it. The body dropped. Naruto pulled his arm free from the corpse and turned to the second operative, who had drawn a pair of kunai and was already backpedaling. The kunai flew. Naruto raised one arm and the blades bounced off his hardened forearm with a spark and a metallic ring. He closed the distance in 2 strides. His legs had thickened, the muscle fiber packed in a configuration built for explosive forward movement, and drove his bone blade through the second operative's throat, severing the spine at the C3 vertebra. The body crumpled in a heap of twitching limbs. The lead operative completed his seals. Katon, Gokakyu no Jutsu. A fireball the size of a carriage roared from his mouth, engulfing the child entirely. The flames licked across Naruto's body for 3 full seconds. His skin, already heat-resistant from the initial explosion, simply refused to burn again. The adaptation was already complete. Fire was a solved equation. The flames parted around him like water breaking against a stone in a river, and he walked through the dying technique with his bone blades dripping the blood of 2 dead men. The lead operative did something that root conditioning was supposed to prevent. He felt fear. Genuine, animal, pants-wetting fear. He turned to run. Naruto's arm extended, the bone elongated an additional 6 inches in a fraction of a second, and the blade punched through the operative's lower back, severing his spinal cord mid-flight. The man hit the ground face first, legs useless, mask cracking against the rubble. Naruto retracted the blade and walked to stand over the paralyzed agent. He tilted his head, studied the man beneath him with an expression devoid of anger, devoid of grief, devoid of anything a 7-year-old should feel after dying and being reborn in the span of 90 seconds. 3 of you, Naruto said. The bone blades receded into his forearms, the skin sealing smoothly over the wounds as though they had never existed. 3 of you in a warehouse of explosives, and I'm still here. He left the operative alive, paralyzed, bleeding, but alive. A message in human flesh for whoever sent them. Naruto walked out of the ruined warehouse and into the street, and the moonlight caught the black patches of reinforced skin across his torso, the slight asymmetry of his rebuilt ribcage, the way his eyes caught light like a predator's in the underbrush. A civilian woman saw him and screamed, dropping her groceries across the cobblestones. Naruto looked at her, then past her, then at the village beyond, the lights, the signs, the Hokage monument carved into the mountainside, and he understood something fundamental. They had tried to unmake him. His body had answered, and the answer was absolute. He was 7 years old. He was covered in other people's blood, and he was completely, irreversibly something else. The third Hokage received the report within the hour. His pipe went cold in his hands as he read it. 3 root agents, dead or crippled, an explosion that should have atomized a Jonin, and a boy walking home afterward with regenerated skin and restructured bones. Hiruzen summoned the boy to his office at dawn. Naruto sat in the chair across from the Hokage's desk with the loose stillness of something that had already decided it could survive whatever happened next. The old man asked him how he felt. Naruto considered the question for a long time. Different, he said finally. Everything is different. Hiruzen tried to explain. The QB, the seal, the likelihood that the fox's chakra had interacted with the trauma response and triggered some kind of accelerated regeneration. Naruto listened. He understood the words, but he also understood that the old man was guessing. Whatever lived inside his cells, whatever mechanism now drove his flesh to rewrite itself in response to destruction, it went beyond the fox. The QB healed. Naruto's body didn't merely heal. It learned. It improved. It remembered every wound and built a fortress against the repetition of that wound ever again. The fire couldn't hurt him anymore. Blades couldn't penetrate his reinforced tissue. His bones were denser than steel in the places where fractures had occurred. Every injury was a lesson, and his body was the most devoted student that evolution had ever produced. He enrolled in the academy. He attended classes alongside children who threw erasers and passed notes and giggled about crushes. He sat in the back row and said almost nothing. His body had returned to an outwardly human appearance. The hardened skin receded when it wasn't needed. His bone structure normalized. His eyes shifted back toward a normal blue, but beneath the surface, every cell carried the memory of reconstruction. He was a weapon wearing a boy's face. Iruka Umino noticed him, tried to reach him, found a wall of indifference thicker than the reinforced tissue that lined Naruto's skeleton. The boy engaged with curriculum material the way a wolf engages with a sheep pen, assessing, analyzing, finding every structural weakness in the information presented, then filing it away for future use. He aced written examinations without studying. His taijutsu was brutal and economical in a way that disturbed the instructors. He fought like someone who understood, at a cellular level, where a human body broke. Because his own body had broken in every conceivable way and rebuilt itself each time, graduation came. Naruto took his headband without ceremony, without celebration, without the tearful pride that marked the other students' faces as they showed their parents. He tied the metal plate around his forehead and walked out of the academy into the sunlight, already knowing that the life of a genin would bring new traumas, new challenges, new forms of damage, and his body would answer each one. He was assigned to Team 7, Kakashi Hatake, the copy ninja, Sasuke Uchiha, last survivor of the Uchiha massacre, Sakura Haruno, brightest academic mind in their class year. Naruto studied his teammates the way he studied everything, as variables, as data points, as potential sources of either irrelevance or interesting input. Sasuke burned with ambition and grief in equal measure, chasing the ghost of a brother who had slaughtered everyone he loved. Sakura burned with admiration for Sasuke and anxiety about her own worth. Naruto felt neither ambition nor anxiety. He simply existed. An immovable fact in a world of fragile, breakable people. Kakashi arrived 3 hours late to their first team meeting, gave them a speech about teamwork, and announced the bell test. Training Ground 3. 2 bells on his hip. Come at him with intent to kill or fail. Kakashi read his orange book and waited. Sasuke hid in the tree line, planning, calculating angles of attack. Sakura hid behind Sasuke, following his lead. Naruto stood in the middle of the clearing and looked at Kakashi with the flat disinterest of a predator, watching something that wasn't yet food. "You're supposed to hide," Kakashi said, turning a page. "Why?" Naruto asked. Kakashi blinked. The single visible eye shifted from lazy to focused in the span of a breath. The Jonin closed his book, tucked it into his pouch, and performed a single hand seal. Magen Narakumi no Jutsu, Hell Viewing Technique. The world around Naruto dissolved. No, it warped. The training ground became the warehouse. The explosive tags on the walls, the fire, the death. A standard genjutsu designed to prey on a target's greatest fear and lock them in a loop of psychological trauma. For any normal genin, this would be the end of the test. Naruto's pupils dilated. His brain registered the foreign chakra intrusion, a signal threading through his cerebral cortex, hijacking his sensory processing centers, feeding false data to his visual and auditory systems. His immune response activated. His neurons fired in patterns that shouldn't have been possible for a human brain, rerouting neural pathways in real time, severing the chakra threads at the point of cortical contact. His brain chemistry rewired itself in less than 2 seconds. The genjutsu collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. The warehouse vanished. The training ground returned. Naruto stood exactly where he had been standing, utterly unmoved. His expression unchanged, except for a slight narrowing of the eyes that suggested irritation rather than fear. Kakashi's visible eye widened. He had seen genjutsu resistance before, from experienced jonin, from Sharingan users, from monks who had trained their minds for decades. He had never seen a 12-year-old child simply reject a foreign chakra signal through what appeared to be an involuntary immune response. The boy's brain had treated the genjutsu like a pathogen and eliminated it. Interesting approach, Naruto said. It failed. Kakashi's demeanor shifted. The lazy, slouching posture straightened. He dropped into a proper fighting stance, something he almost never did against genin. His instincts told him that whatever this child was, he wasn't a standard threat assessment. Kakashi moved. He blurred forward at jonin speed, fast enough that most chunin wouldn't see the first strike coming, and drove his foot into Naruto's midsection. The kick connected with full force, launching the boy backward across the clearing. Naruto's body left the ground, crashed through a tree trunk, and landed in the river that bordered the training ground. He sank beneath the surface. Kakashi watched the water, the ripples spreading outward from the point of impact. He began running through hand seals. Suiton, Suiryudan no Jutsu, water dragon technique. The river erupted upward, a serpentine mass of pressurized water coiling into the shape of a dragon that roared toward the point where Naruto had submerged. The water dragon struck the surface with enough force to crater the riverbed. Water exploded outward in a 50-meter spray. Kakashi waited, scanning the aftermath. The river churned, brown with disturbed sediment. For 3 seconds, nothing moved. Then Naruto emerged. He walked out of the shallows like something from a primordial sea, and his body had changed. 3 slits had opened on each side of his neck, gills, raw and red, pulling oxygen from the water that still dripped down his skin. His flesh had developed a hydrophobic layer, water beating and running off his body the way it runs off the feathers of a diving bird. His torso showed the impact point of Kakashi's kick, a bruise that was already yellowing, already healing, the underlying muscle fiber repacking itself into a denser, more impact-resistant configuration. His rib cage had thickened. His abdominal wall had developed a secondary layer of cartilage beneath the skin. "You kicked me," Naruto observed. "That was educational." Kakashi felt something cold settle in his chest. The same feeling he'd had when he'd faced down an S-rank missing nin for the first time as an Anbu captain. The recognition that he was looking at something genuinely dangerous. He made a decision. He needed to test the limits. He pulled his headband up, revealing the Sharingan eye beneath, and channeled lightning chakra into his right hand. The sound of 1,000 birds filled the clearing. Chidori. A reduced version, nowhere near the killing force of a full-power strike, but enough voltage to stun a grown man unconscious. He drove it into the river. The water conducted the lightning instantly. Electricity ripped through the shallows in a web of blue-white arcs, catching Naruto full in the body. Every muscle in the boy's frame seized, his jaw clamped shut. The voltage poured through him for a full 2 seconds, long enough to stop a human heart, long enough to fry nerve endings and cook muscle from the inside. Naruto's skin rippled. The outer layer of his epidermis shifted in color and texture, moving from pale to a deep, matte tone that carried the consistency of vulcanized rubber. A grounded, insulating layer grew across his entire body in the span of a heartbeat. The electricity fizzled. The current died against his skin like waves against a seawall. Naruto stood in the electrified water, completely untouched, the new insulating layer shedding the last sparks into the river around him. "Every time you strike me," Naruto said, stepping out of the water and onto the bank, "you only build a better monster." Kakashi lowered his hand. The Chidori died. The Sharingan spun, recording, analyzing, finding nothing in its vast library of copy techniques that explained what it was looking at. This wasn't the Kyuubi's chakra. The boy's seal was intact, the fox's energy dormant. This was something else entirely, something intrinsic to the boy's cellular structure, something that made every attack a lesson and every lesson an upgrade. Naruto crouched, the muscles in his legs, his quadriceps, his calves, his Achilles tendons visibly swelled. The fiber density increased, packed into coiled configurations that stored kinetic energy like a compressed spring. He launched himself forward. The ground where he'd been standing cratered, cobblestone and earth erupting outward in a ring. He crossed the clearing in a single bound, arriving at Kakashi's position before the Jonin could fully react. His fist connected with the earth at Kakashi's feet, a deliberate miss, a demonstration rather than an assault, and the training ground split. A fissure ripped through the soil in a 10-meter line, swallowing 2 trees and scattering Sasuke and Sakura from their hiding positions. The shockwave knocked Kakashi off his feet, and by the time the copy ninja recovered his balance, Naruto was standing in front of him with 2 bells dangling from his index finger. Nobody spoke. Sasuke stared from the tree line, his Sharingan freshly activated in the stress of the moment, spinning uselessly, unable to process what it had just witnessed. Sakura had both hands pressed over her mouth, her eyes the size of dinner plates. Kakashi stood slowly, brushed the dirt from his flak jacket, and looked at the boy in front of him with a completely new understanding of what Team 7 actually was. "Well," Kakashi said, and for the first time in years, his voice carried genuine uncertainty. "I suppose you pass." Naruto tossed him the bells back. "I took both. Give one to each of them. They weren't the obstacle." He walked away from the training ground without looking back, and the gills on his neck sealed themselves shut as the hydrophobic layer faded from his skin. Unnecessary adaptations, receding until needed again. His body was an archive of survival responses, growing larger with every encounter. Kakashi watched him go and made a mental note to visit the Hokage that evening. Whatever Naruto Uzumaki was becoming, it needed to be monitored. Whether it could be contained was a separate question, one that Kakashi suspected had an uncomfortable answer. The weeks that followed brought D-rank missions, chores dressed up as shinobi work, errands for civilians, cat retrieval and fence painting and garden weeding. Naruto performed them without complaint and without engagement. He was waiting. His body was waiting. It craved the stimulus of genuine threat, the data of real combat, the opportunity to encounter something it hadn't already solved. He spent his free time training alone, subjecting himself to controlled environmental stresses. He held his hand over an open flame until his palm stopped registering pain. He submerged himself in ice water until his body generated enough internal heat to steam the surface around him. He ate poisonous plants from the Forest of Death's perimeter, his digestive system breaking down each toxin, cataloging it, building immunity in hours instead of the years it would take a normal constitution. He was optimizing himself the way a blacksmith folds steel, through stress, through fire, through repetition. Sasuke watched. The Uchiha couldn't look away from Naruto's impossible existence. Every standard of power that Sasuke had built his worldview around, bloodline limits, innate talent, years of grueling discipline, Naruto rendered irrelevant. The boy simply absorbed experience and became stronger. There was nothing to copy, nothing to train toward, nothing to match through willpower alone. It ate at Sasuke like acid. He trained harder. He pushed himself to the breaking point every day, trying to close a gap that widened with every sunrise. It was futile, and somewhere in the back of his mind, he knew it. The mission to the Land of Waves came like a gift from the universe finally giving Naruto something to hit. Tazuna the bridge builder was a drunk and a liar, but the threat against his life was real. Zabuza Momochi, demon of the mist, A-rank missing nin, master of the silent killing technique. The team encountered him on the road, a massive cleaver of a sword embedded in a tree, a figure standing atop it with bandages wrapped around his face and murder in his eyes. Kakashi engaged immediately, pulling his headband up and dropping into combat readiness. He ordered his genin to protect the client. Naruto ignored the order. Zabuza was fast, inhumanly fast for his size, swinging the Kubikiri Bocho, the executioner's blade, in arcs that carved trenches in the earth. He caught Kakashi in the hidden mist technique, filled the entire roadway with thick white fog that reduced visibility to zero. Kakashi vanished into the mist to fight on the assassin's terms. Naruto stood still, listening. His ears were already adjusting, the bones of his inner ear shifting, tympanic membranes expanding, auditory processing centers in his brain amplifying sound input. He could hear Zabuza's heartbeat through the fog. He could hear the displaced air as the massive blade swung. He tracked the fight by sound alone for 12 seconds before Zabuza broke away from Kakashi and came for the weaker targets. The executioner's blade came out of the mist like a horizontal guillotine, aimed at the bridge builder's neck. Naruto stepped into its path. The blade caught him at the left shoulder and kept going, cleaving through muscle, through bone, through the joint itself. His arm separated from his body and hit the ground with a wet thud. Sasuke screamed something, a warning or a curse, it didn't matter. Sakura froze. Tazuna stumbled backward, dropping his bottle. Zabuza emerged from the mist behind his blade, eyes creased in amusement above his bandages. "Useless brat," the demon of the mist said. "You stepped into that willingly? Suicidal?" Naruto looked at the stump where his arm had been. Blood poured from severed arteries for exactly 1.5 seconds before the vessels sealed themselves shut, cauterized from within by a heat generated at the cellular level. The bleeding stopped completely. His expression carried nothing resembling pain or shock. He studied the wound with the same detachment a scientist studies a petri dish. "Fascinating," he said. The stump erupted. Zabuza's smirk died as he watched, truly watched, what happened next. Tendons fired outward from the wound like grappling hooks, weaving around each other in helical patterns. Bone grew behind them, faster than any natural process. a humerus forming in 3 seconds, and an ulna and radius in 2 more. Muscle layered over the skeleton in thick, fibrous sheets, but the texture was wrong. The new arm was covered in jagged metallic scales that caught the light with a mirror sheen. The fingers that formed at the end were tipped in claws rather than nails, and the forearm carried visible ridges of reinforced bone that protruded like natural armor plating. The entire process took less than 8 seconds. Naruto flexed his new hand, examined the metallic scales with a brief glance, and then punched the flat of the executioner's blade, the legendary sword, forged to be unbreakable, designed to regenerate from the iron in its victim's blood, dented inward at the point of contact. A warping of metal that should have been impossible from any physical strike. Zabuza felt the vibration travel up through the handle, through his wrists, through his forearms, and he released the blade involuntarily. It embedded itself in the ground between them. Zabuza stared at the dent in his sword, then at the boy, then at the scaled arm that had just deformed a blade that had survived 1,000 battles without a scratch. "What are you?" Zabuza breathed. Naruto didn't answer. He reached forward and grabbed Zabuza by the bandages around his face, pulling the man down to eye level with impossible strength. The metallic scales on his new arm ground against the fabric with a sound like a knife being drawn from a sheath. Kakashi emerged from the mist behind them, Sharingan spinning, ready to intervene, and stopped. He watched his student holding an A-rank assassin by the jaw and felt, for the second time in a week, like the world had shifted on its axis. Naruto released Zabuza, threw him backward, actually sent the man sliding across the wet ground with enough force to uproot a small tree on impact. A signal of dominance rather than a killing blow. He had made his point. The demon of the mist picked himself up, retrieved his blade, and vanished into the tree line with a body flicker. He would return with a new plan. Naruto already looked forward to it. The bridge was half built when Zabuza returned, this time accompanied by Haku, a boy their age wearing a porcelain mask, possessing the ice-release bloodline limit. The battle split along natural lines. Kakashi engaged Zabuza on the unfinished bridge, Sharingan against silent killing, while Haku targeted the Genin, guarding Tazuna. Sasuke fought first, his awakened Sharingan tracking the masked boy's speed with increasing accuracy, but Haku was faster. The ice mirrors rose around them, a dome of reflective ice panels that turned Haku into a blur of movement, Senbon needles flying from every angle simultaneously. Sasuke fell, multiple needles in his neck and chest, placed to simulate death, a mercy from a boy who hated killing. Naruto stepped into the mirror dome. The temperature inside was extreme, far below zero, the kind of cold that cracked skin and turned breath to crystals. His body registered the threat instantly. His core temperature plummeted for 1 second, 2 seconds, and then reversed. Deep within his torso, his cells began generating heat at an accelerated rate. A hyperthermic furnace ignited in his chest cavity, pushing his internal temperature to levels that should have cooked his organs, but instead radiated outward in waves of visible heat distortion. The ice panels nearest to him began to sweat. Droplets formed on their surfaces and ran downward in streams. Haku appeared in a mirror directly in front of Naruto, Senbon drawn, poised to strike. Naruto exhaled, and what left his lungs was a gust of superheated steam, scalding, pressurized, carrying enough thermal energy to blister flesh at 20 meters. The steam hit the mirror dome from the inside. Every panel cracked simultaneously. The ice went from solid to liquid in the span of a single breath, collapsing inward as warm water that splashed across the bridge in a spreading pool. Haku landed in the water, maskless now. The porcelain had cracked in the heat, and tried to reform the mirrors. The water refused to freeze. The ambient temperature around Naruto's body made ice impossible within a 15-meter radius. Haku's bloodline limit became useless. His greatest weapon, negated by proximity. Naruto crossed the distance between them in 2 steps and grabbed Haku by the wrist. The grip was absolute, his fingers locked with the same calcifying force that had trapped the Ambu's blade 5 years earlier. Haku struggled. The ice user was strong, trained since childhood by Zabuza, honed into a weapon of efficiency and grace. Against Naruto's grip, he might as well have been struggling against a geological formation. "Your elements are primitive," Naruto told him. His voice carried that same low resonance, that grinding frequency that made the bones behind the ears vibrate uncomfortably. He tossed Haku aside. The boy hit the bridge railing and slumped, conscious but beaten, his toolbox of techniques rendered empty by an opponent whose existence invalidated elemental advantage. Naruto looked at Sasuke's fallen form, the Senbon needles, the shallow breathing, the state of suspended animation, and pulled the needles out with a practiced efficiency that suggested he'd already analyzed their exact placement and angle. Sasuke gasped awake, eyes wild, Sharingan spinning. He looked up at Naruto and saw the scaled arm, the heat shimmer rolling off his skin, the steam still rising from the puddles around him. Something in Sasuke's expression broke. The gap between them had become a canyon. The rest happened quickly. Kakashi defeated Zabuza with a combination of his copied water techniques and a well-placed summoning that pinned the swordsman to the bridge with tracking dogs. Gato arrived with his mercenary army, betrayed Zabuza as expected. Zabuza, mortally wounded and enraged, slaughtered Gato in his inner circle before bleeding out on the bridge he tried to destroy. Haku survived. Naruto's decision to spare him meant the ice user lived to mourn his master and eventually wander into an uncertain future. The bridge was completed. Tazuna named it after Kakashi, the official hero of the mission. Naruto didn't correct the narrative. Names and credit were currencies he had zero interest in collecting. They returned to Konoha. The village felt smaller now, a fishbowl of politics and fear and simmering tensions that Naruto perceived with the detachment of something that existed outside its power structures. He trained. He improved. He subjected himself to new stimuli, electric shocks, chemical burns, sensory deprivation, high-altitude exposure on the Hokage monument. Each trauma built another layer of adaptation. Each layer made the next adaptation faster, more efficient, more extreme. His body was learning to learn. Meta-adaptation, a recursive loop of improvement that accelerated with every cycle. The Chunin exams were announced 6 weeks later, and foreign shinobi began pouring into the village from every allied nation. Naruto observed them from a rooftop as they passed through the main gate. Delegations from grass, waterfall, rain, sound, and sand. The sand delegation caught his attention. 3 siblings, a puppet user with face paint and a wrapped bundle on his back, a boy with red hair and black-ringed eyes who smelled like dry blood and madness, and a blonde woman carrying a massive iron fan on her back. Her posture was aggressive, her stride confident, her eyes sweeping the streets of Konoha with the dismissive assessment of a conqueror surveying territory. She moved like a fighter who expected every room to contain a threat. Naruto found that interesting. He encountered them that afternoon. Kankuro, the puppet user, had cornered Konohamaru in an alley, lifting the boy by his scarf for running into him. Standard bully behavior from a visiting shinobi trying to establish dominance in foreign territory. Naruto appeared at the end of the alley and waited. Kankuro noticed him. "What do you want, brat?" The puppet user sneered, releasing Konohamaru with a shove. "Put him down," Naruto said. His voice carried that low-register grind, and Kankuro's sneer faltered for a fraction of a second. An instinctive, lizard brain recognition that something about the blonde boy at the end of the alley was fundamentally different from the genin he'd been pushing around all morning. Kankuro drew chakra threads from his fingertips, a threatening gesture, 5 hair-thin wires of concentrated chakra extending toward Naruto in a fan pattern. Naruto's eyes shifted. His irises expanded, the pupils contracting to pinpoints as the photoreceptor cells in his retinas multiplied and reconfigured themselves. He could see the threads. Every single one of them, their exact positions, their tension, the way they connected to the man's fingertip tenketsu points. Microscopic strands of blue energy that were invisible to any normal eye became as obvious as bridge cables. Naruto raised one hand and flicked his wrist. The motion was so fast it blurred, and the impact was precise enough to sever all 5 threads simultaneously. The cut ends drifted to the ground like spider silk. Kankuro stepped back. Behind him, Tamari planted her fan on the ground and leaned against it, watching the interaction with newly sharpened interest. She'd felt the wind displacement from Naruto's flick, a movement that fast, that accurate, that effortless. This wasn't a normal genin. The red-haired boy, Gaara watched from the rooftop above with flat, murderous eyes, but even he tilted his head slightly. A predator recognizing another predator, Tamari lifted her fan. She was smiling now, the kind of smile that preceded violence, all teeth and challenge. She swung the fan open with one hand and brought it forward in a single sweeping motion. Kamaitachi no Jutsu, wind scythe technique. A horizontal blade of concentrated air pressure ripped down the alley toward Naruto, strong enough to slice through wooden walls and lift a grown man off his feet. The cobblestones cracked in its wake. Kankuro barely managed to flatten himself against the wall in time. Naruto planted his feet. His toes, hidden inside his sandals, extended, the bones elongating downward, punching through the leather and driving into the cobblestone like organic anchors. His leg bones thickened, his center of gravity dropped. His posture shifted into an aerodynamic profile that presented zero flat surfaces to the incoming wind. His body became a blade standing edge on to the gust, and the wind split around him, flowing past on either side like a river around a stone. His hair ruffled. That was the extent of the technique's effect. The cobblestones behind him exploded outward in a fan of debris, but he stood untouched. Tamari lowered her fan. Her smile changed, less aggressive, more genuinely impressed. She rested the closed fan across her shoulder and studied him the way a swordsman studies a blade of exceptional quality. "You're impossible to break, Uzumaki," she said, his cynical expression. The flat, unyielding mask he wore against a world that had tried to kill him before he could read, softened by a fraction. The corners of his mouth moved upward by perhaps a millimeter. On his face, it was the equivalent of a standing ovation. "And you hit like a hurricane, Tamari," he answered. "Keep trying." Something sparked between them in that moment, a mutual recognition, a respect born from the understanding that they were both weapons walking in the shape of people. She refused to back down. He refused to be moved. The equation balanced in a way that felt rare, felt earned. Kankuro looked between them with visible confusion. Gaara vanished from the rooftop without comment, but Tamari lingered. She studied Naruto for several more seconds, committing his face to memory before turning on her heel and walking away with her brothers. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She'd already decided she would see him again. The Chunin exams began with a written test designed to reward cheating and punish the obvious. Naruto sat through it without moving his pencil. His eyes, still carrying the enhanced perception from his encounter with Kankuro, could read the answer sheet of the plant 3 rows ahead simply by tracking the indentations his pencil made in the paper. He wrote his answers with bored efficiency and waited for the 10th question. Abiki Morino, the proctor, delivered his ultimatum: quit now or risk being a genin forever. Naruto said nothing. He simply sat. The idea of quitting registered in his brain with the same significance as the idea of spontaneous combustion, possible in theory, impossible in practice, irrelevant as a consideration. The second exam threw them into the forest of death. Training Ground 44, a contained wilderness of oversized predators, toxic flora, and lethal terrain. Team 7 entered through Gate 12. They had 5 days to collect both scrolls and reach the central tower. Naruto moved through the forest like he belonged there. Like the predatory ecosystem recognized him as a peer rather than prey. Giant centipedes avoided him. The venomous leeches in the river detached when they tasted his blood. Even the massive tigers that stalked the canopy gave his path a wide berth. His body exuded something, a chemical signal, a pheromone, an unconscious communication at the biological level that registered as apex predator to every organism in the forest. They knew. On some fundamental instinctive level, every living thing in that forest understood what Naruto was. They obtained their second scroll on the first day by ambushing a rain team that made the mistake of setting camp within Naruto's sensory range. His hearing had expanded to include subsonic frequencies, and he could detect heartbeats at 50 meters. The fight lasted 9 seconds. The rain genin would recover eventually. Team 7 pressed deeper into the forest, aiming for the tower, moving fast, and then the air changed. A pressure descended through the canopy, killing intent so dense it felt like wading through oil. Sakura dropped to her knees, hyperventilating. Sasuke froze, every muscle locked in a trauma response that bypassed his training entirely. They were prey experiencing the presence of something so far above them on the food chain that their bodies simply refused to function in its proximity. Naruto stood still. He felt the killing intent. His adrenal glands responded, dumping cortisol and adrenaline into his bloodstream. His body began preparing for what he didn't yet know. But something was coming. Something that warranted full adaptation readiness. Orochimaru of the Sannin descended from the canopy like a nightmare wearing a human disguise. His face, a pale, stretched mask that barely concealed the serpentine hunger beneath, split into a grin as he surveyed Team 7. His eyes found Sasuke and lit with possessive desire. The boy's Sharingan, the Uchiha bloodline, a body worth taking, a vessel worth grooming. He extended his tongue, impossibly long, prehensile, glistening, and laughed. "The last Uchiha," Orochimaru breathed. "I've been looking forward to this." He moved. The speed was wrong, too fast for anything that size, too fluid for anything that shape. He was across the clearing before Sasuke could draw a kunai, one hand extended toward the boy's neck, fingers glowing with the prepared seal. Naruto intercepted. He appeared between them, his leg muscles firing in that kinetic burst configuration that had cratered the training ground against Kakashi, and his reinforced forearm caught Orochimaru's wrist in a block that shook the air between them. Orochimaru paused. His reptilian eyes slid sideways to examine the boy who had just inserted himself between a Sannin and his target. He saw the metallic scales on the forearm, the density of the muscle fiber, the impossible speed of the interception. His smile widened. "And who are you?" the snake Sannin purred. "An obstacle," Naruto replied. Orochimaru's neck extended, a grotesque elongation of vertebrae and muscle, his head shooting forward like a striking cobra. His fangs, elongated, dripping with purple venom, sank into the junction between Naruto's neck and shoulder. The five-pronged seal followed immediately after, Orochimaru's fingers slamming into Naruto's stomach to disrupt the Kyuubi's seal. A dual-pronged attack, lethal venom coursing through his bloodstream and seal disruption cutting him off from the fox's chakra. Naruto dropped to one knee. His body temperature plummeted. His vision grayed at the edges. The venom was moving fast. Orochimaru's personal blend, refined over decades, designed to kill within minutes, even with medical intervention. Orochimaru withdrew his fangs and watched, expecting the boy to collapse. Expecting the cursed seal to bloom across his skin, the heaven seal, his mark of ownership, his leash. He waited for the familiar pattern of black tomoe to spread from the bite wound. Instead, Naruto's body began to shake. Every muscle vibrated at a frequency visible to the naked eye. His skin flushed red, then purple, then took on a greenish tint that made Orochimaru's smile falter for the first time. Inside Naruto's body, a war was being fought at the cellular level. His white blood cells, already mutated far beyond normal human parameters, identified the venom and the foreign chakra of the cursed seal simultaneously. They treated both as hostile organisms. The venom was isolated, broken down into component compounds, analyzed, and then synthesized in reverse. His blood began producing the venom's molecular inverse at an accelerated rate, neutralizing the poison in his veins within seconds. But his body didn't stop there. It recognized the venom as a weapon. It learned the compound, and it began producing the venom itself, modified, concentrated, more potent than Orochimaru's original formula, and routing it to his sweat glands and pores as a secondary excretion system. The cursed seal met a more violent end. The senjutsu-infused chakra that composed the seal attempted to establish itself in Naruto's chakra network, to root itself like a parasite and begin converting his energy systems to Orochimaru's specifications. Naruto's white blood cells surrounded it, devoured it, tore the foreign chakra apart at the molecular level, and fed it directly into his own reserves, absorbing the natural energy component, adding it to his base strength like a predator consuming another predator and taking its traits. The black tomoe that had begun forming around the bite wound receded, dissolved, vanished entirely. The seal died stillborn. His body had eaten it. Naruto stood up. His skin had taken on a faint green tinge, and from his pores, a mist was rising, a toxic, corrosive gas, visible as a green haze that clung to his body like an aura. The grass at his feet withered. The bark on nearby trees blackened and peeled. He looked at Orochimaru, and the Sannin saw something he hadn't seen in decades of terrorizing the shinobi world. He saw a threat that superseded his own. "Your biology is fundamentally flawed," Naruto said. He exhaled. The green gas, weaponized from the Sanin's own venom, concentrated and deployed as an offensive biochemical weapon, billowed outward in a concentrated plume directly into Orochimaru's face. The effect was immediate and horrifying. The Sanin's facial flesh began to melt. Skin sloughed off in sheets, revealing the musculature beneath, and that too began to dissolve, layers of tissue breaking down at an accelerated rate as the corrosive compound ate through everything organic it contacted. Orochimaru staggered back, his face a ruin of exposed bone and dissolving muscle, one eye bulging from a socket whose supporting structure was liquefying in real time. He tried to speak, to scream, to curse, to issue a threat. His jaw unhinged as the connective tissue failed. Naruto stepped forward, and his own jaw opened wider than any human mouth should. A secondary mutation, a threat display that revealed rows of serrated teeth that had grown behind his normal dentition. A predator's maw, a warning made flesh. "You try to rewrite my DNA?" Naruto said, and each word came through those serrated rows with a grinding resonance that vibrated the very air. "I am the apex." Orochimaru's remaining eye, the one that hadn't melted shut, stared at Naruto with an emotion the Sanin hand hadn't felt since his confrontation with Hanzo of the Salamander decades ago. Pure, distilled terror. He made the only choice left available to him. His jaw stretched impossibly wide, or what remained of his jaw, and a new body emerged from his throat. The oral rebirth technique, the shedding of a damaged host for a fresh one stored within. The old body collapsed like a deflated skin, and a new Orochimaru emerged, pale, untouched, but shaking, visibly shaking. He looked at Naruto once more, and then he ran. A Sanin, one of the 3 legendary shinobi who had survived the Second War, who had terrorized nations, who had made Kaji-level opponents balk. He ran from a 12-year-old boy whose body had treated him as a lesson and graduated from the experience. Orochimaru vanished into the forest canopy. The killing intent evaporated. Sakura was still on her knees, hyperventilating. Sasuke had watched the entire exchange from behind Naruto's back, had watched a Sanin's face melt off his skull, had watched Naruto's body reject a cursed seal that would have made most shinobi into puppets, had watched the creature in front of him grow teeth designed for tearing flesh from bone. The gap between them wasn't a canyon anymore. It was a void. Naruto let the green gas dissipate. His skin returned to its normal color as the venom excretion ceased. Unnecessary now, the threat eliminated. His jaw reset itself, the serrated teeth receding behind his normal set. He turned to face his teammates, and they both flinched. Involuntarily, instinctively, even knowing he was their ally, their bodies recognized what their minds tried to deny. He was something they should be afraid of. "We need to reach the tower," Naruto said. He said it like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just driven off one of the most dangerous men alive through sheer biological supremacy. They reached the tower. They advanced to the preliminary rounds. Naruto fought his match, a sound genin named Zaku, who channeled air pressure through tubes in his arms. Naruto allowed the first blast to hit him, felt the concussive damage to his eardrums, and his body responded by thickening the tympanic membrane and adding a secondary bone shield around the inner ear canal. The second blast washed over him without effect. He walked forward through the third blast, grabbed Zaku by both arms, and broke them at the elbow with a rotation of his wrists. The fight lasted 12 seconds. The crowd, a mix of Jonin, Genin, and Proctors, watched in absolute silence. Tamari fought in the preliminary rounds as well. She battled Tenten, the weapons specialist from Team Guy, and dismantled her with wind technique after wind technique. Every projectile deflected, every iron weapon sent spinning back at its owner. Tamari won with overwhelming force, and when she descended from the arena floor, she passed Naruto on the stairs. She paused. He paused. They looked at each other for 3 seconds without speaking. A check-in, a confirmation that the other was still there, still unbroken, still worth respecting. Tamari's lip curled upward in a half smirk. 12 seconds, she said. Sloppy. You could have done it in 5. I was collecting data, he replied. Liar. Her smirk widened. You were showing off for the audience. She was wrong. But the fact that she was comfortable enough to accuse him of vanity, That she saw him as something approachable enough to tease registered in his chest as something other than the cold, analytical neutrality he usually felt. Something warmer. Warmer bothered him. He couldn't adapt against warmth because warmth wasn't damage. He didn't know what to do with a feeling that required vulnerability instead of armor. She walked past him. Her shoulder brushed his arm. She didn't flinch at the texture. The faint roughness of subdermal plating that lingered beneath his skin at all times now. She felt it and kept walking, utterly unbothered, as though touching a being of impossible mutation was the most natural thing in the world. Naruto watched her go. Something shifted in his chest that had nothing to do with mutation. The month between the preliminary rounds and the final tournament passed quickly. Naruto trained alone in the wilderness outside Konoha, pushing himself, subjecting himself to increasingly extreme environmental stresses, forcing his body to adapt faster, to respond more efficiently, to produce more radical mutations in shorter time frames. He dove into volcanic hot springs until his skin could resist temperatures that would melt steel. He buried himself alive and forced his lungs to extract oxygen from compacted earth. He swallowed industrial-grade toxins from abandoned laboratories and let his blood learn to neutralize everything. Each day he became something further removed from human and closer to something that had never existed before. A predator that evolved in real time, that carried the accumulated solutions to 100 different deaths within a single body. Tamari found him twice during that month. Found him or sought him out. The distinction mattered, and Naruto suspected the latter. The first time she appeared at his training site and watched him hold his head underwater for 6 minutes. When he surfaced, gills flared, eyes adapted to aquatic refraction. She was sitting on a rock with her fan across her knees, expression unreadable. "You're insane," she said. "I'm thorough," he corrected. "Same thing coming from you." She stood, hefted her fan, and took a stance. "Spar with me." They fought for an hour. She threw everything she had. Kamaitachi, Daikamaitachi, raw unstructured wind blasts that could strip bark from trees, and he adapted to each one in sequence. Her wind couldn't move him. Her blades of compressed air bounced off his skin like rain. But she was fast, and she was clever, and she attacked from angles he didn't anticipate. She caught him once, a wind release technique that came from directly below, punching upward through the earth and launching him skyward before he could anchor his feet. He hung in the air for a moment, and she was already swinging, already driving a follow-up blast toward him while he lacked ground contact. He twisted midair. His spine flexed in a way that human spines shouldn't, vertebrae sliding past each other in a serpentine articulation that let him redirect his falling trajectory. He landed behind her. She spun. Their faces were 6 inches apart. Her fan was between them. She'd brought it up in a guard position instinctively, and his hand was around the spine of the fan, holding it in place. They were both breathing hard. Her eyes searched his face. "You adapted to aerial combat in 3 seconds, she said. 2, he corrected. "Freak," she said, but her voice carried affection instead of disgust. She pulled her fan free and stepped back, wiping sweat from her forehead with her forearm. They stood in the ruined clearing, trees toppled, ground cratered, a landscape that looked like 2 natural disasters had collided in the same space, and looked at each other with the unspoken acknowledgement that whatever this was between them, it was real. It was the only real thing either of them had found in a world of brittle alliances and fragile people. "You're fighting in the finals," she said. "Yes." "I might be fighting you." "I hope so," he said, and meant it. She left. He watched her go and felt that warmth again, that irreducible, unadaptable sensation that lived somewhere beneath the layers of hardened tissue and reinforced bone. She'd hit him with everything in her arsenal, and he hadn't moved. But she'd also looked at him, at all of him, at the mutations and the monstrous possibilities and the inhuman potential coiled inside his cells, and she hadn't flinched. That hit harder than any wind blade. The Chunin exam finals arrived, and with them, the hidden machinery of the Sand Sound invasion clicked into position. The stadium was packed. Thousands of spectators from across the elemental nations, seated in rising rows of concrete and stone, here to watch the next generation of shinobi prove themselves. The Hokage sat in the Kage box beside the Kazekage, who was actually Orochimaru in disguise, wearing the dead Kage's face like a mask, waiting for his signal to strike. The atmosphere was electric, festival energy barely concealing the violence waiting to erupt beneath it. Naruto fought Neji Hyuga in the first match. The Hyuga prodigy, with his Byakugan and his gentle fist and his rigid philosophy about fate and destiny. He struck Naruto's Tenketsu points 14 times in the first exchange, 64 palms, a technique designed to seal chakra pathways and render a shinobi helpless. Naruto's body responded within seconds. His Tenketsu points, which were just openings in his chakra network, sealed themselves shut when struck, then regenerated new pathways around the blocked points. Alternative routes for chakra flow grew like tributaries around a dammed river. By the time Neji completed his barrage, Naruto's chakra was flowing through a network that looked nothing like a human being's. Redundant, recursive, impossible to fully shut down because it rewrote itself faster than it could be closed. Neji stared at his handiwork. The Byakugan showed him what should have been a chakra system reduced to a trickle. Instead, it showed him a glowing network that had doubled in complexity, new pathways branching in all directions, a system that had responded to his attack by becoming something his family's techniques were never designed to handle. Impossible, Neji breathed. Improbable. Naruto corrected, yet here I stand. He walked forward. Neji struck again. Hakekusho air palm, a ranged gentle fist blast. Naruto's body had already adapted. His internal organs had shifted position slightly. His chakra points had hardened to resist the precise frequency of Hyuga chakra emission. The air palm struck his chest and dissipated like mist against glass. Naruto grabbed Neji by the collar of his robes, lifted the prodigy off his feet with one hand, and dropped him face first into the arena floor with enough force to crater the packed earth. The match was called. Neji lay in the shallow crater, conscious but completely incapable of movement, and stared up at the sky with an expression that suggested his entire worldview. Fate, destiny, the immutable station of birth, had just been rendered obsolete. The crowd was silent for a long moment. Then the cheering started, tentative at first, then growing, then thundering. They had watched a Hyuga prodigy, the best of his generation, get dismantled by a boy who shouldn't be able to stand after receiving the 64 palms. The Jonin in the crowd exchanged glances. The Kage in the VIP box exchanged very different glances. The Kazekage's fingers tightened on the armrest of his chair, Orochimaru's fingers, remembering the green gas melting his face, feeling the phantom pain of dissolution. Tamari's match came next. She fought Shikamaru Nara, the shadow user, the lazy genius who fought like a chess master rather than a warrior. He caught her in his shadow possession technique twice, and twice she broke free through sheer physical force, overwhelming the shadow's binding strength with the raw muscle power of a kunoichi who trained her body like a weapon. She won when she brought her fan down on the arena floor hard enough to create a concussive shockwave that knocked Shikamaru unconscious against the far wall. The crowd roared. She looked up at the stands and found Naruto's eyes in the sea of faces. He nodded once, she nodded back. A mutual acknowledgement that they were both still standing, still winning, still refusing to bend. Then the signal came. A rain of feathers. A mass genjutsu descending over the stadium like snow, putting the civilian population to sleep. The sound of explosions from the village walls. The roar of a summoned snake, massive, three-headed, crashing through Konoha's eastern gate. The sand sound invasion had begun. Orochimaru revealed himself in the Kage box, peeling away the dead Kazekage's face to show his own, and a barrier technique went up, purple walls of chakra sealing him and the Hokage inside for their final confrontation. Chaos erupted. Sand and sound shinobi in the crowd revealed themselves, attacking Konoha's ninja in the stands. Kakashi and Guy began cutting through enemy forces. Sakura shielded unconscious civilians. Sasuke pursued Gaara, who had retreated from the stadium in a partial Shukaku transformation. Naruto looked at the unfolding invasion with the detachment of something that existed above the conflict, a being so far beyond the power level of any individual combatant on the field that intervening felt like a matter of choosing where to apply force rather than a matter of survival. He followed Gaara. The Jinchuriki of the One Tail was the most dangerous piece on the board, a living weapon being activated by its handlers, pointed at Konoha's population center. Sasuke found Gaara first, in the forest outside the stadium. The Uchiha was fast, his Chidori powerful, and he managed to wound the sand armor once, twice. But Gaara was transforming, arms of compressed sand growing over his body, a tail extending from his lower spine, one eye turning yellow and diamond-shaped as the Shukaku fought to emerge. Sasuke took a sand arm to the chest and went down hard, coughing blood, ribs cracked. Sakura arrived and put herself between Gaara and the fallen Uchiha, an act of bravery or stupidity that Naruto would have admired if the timing weren't so terrible. Naruto arrived at the clearing as Gaara completed his transformation. The boy vanished inside a mountain of sand, the full manifestation of the one-tailed Shukaku erupting upward through the tree line. A creature of compressed earth and wind chakra the size of a building, a Biju unleashed against a village full of fragile human bodies. The Shukaku roared, and the sound leveled trees in a half-kilometer radius. Sasuke was unconscious. Sakura was pinned to a tree by sand, barely breathing. Temari and Kankuro were somewhere in the chaos. Naruto's enhanced hearing placed them half a kilometer south, fighting Konoha shinobi, following orders they no longer believed in. Naruto looked up at the Shukaku, looked up at a creature of impossible scale and destructive potential, a living natural disaster, a tailed beast, a being that required Kage-level forces to contain. He felt his body begin to respond. His cells understood the challenge on a level that transcended conscious thought. The threat was larger than anything he'd faced before. Therefore, the adaptation would be larger. His body forced a catastrophic macro mutation. The process was agonizing. Every cell in his body dividing at a rate that should have caused systemic failure. His skeleton elongating, his muscle mass multiplying, his skin hardening into plate after plate of black, interlocking scales. He grew. His outline expanded, 10 feet, 20, 50, 100. His form lost its human proportions and gained something more primal, more ancient, more fundamentally predatory. The exoskeleton that formed across his body was impenetrable, each scale a composite of bone, kerite, and a mineral compound his body had invented on the spot, black as pitch and angled to deflect force along its surface. His arms lengthened, his fingers fused into larger, more powerful digits tipped with claws the size of tree trunks. His jaw extended, filled with teeth that could puncture steel plate. He towered over the tree line, matching the Shukaku in height and exceeding it in density. Where the Shukaku was sand, compressed, channeled, maintained by chakra, Naruto was solid, organic and real and present in a way that made the Biju look hollow. He charged. The ground split beneath his footfalls, each step creating a crater that would take weeks to fill. The Shukaku turned toward him, and for a single moment, the yellow diamond eyes of the tailed beast widened. Biju were ancient. They had existed since the time of the Sage of Six Paths. They had memories that spanned millennia, containing encounters with every conceivable threat the shinobi world had produced. But they had never seen anything like this. A human body that had simply decided to become Biju-sized, that had grown an exoskeleton and claws and predatory mass through sheer adaptive willpower. The Shukaku fired. Funrenkuden, wind release, drilling air bullet. A compressed sphere of wind chakra the size of a house launched from its maw, screaming toward Naruto at speeds that broke the sound barrier. The projectile struck his chest dead center. His exoskeleton cracked, a spiderweb of fracture lines spreading across 6 scales. The impact drove him back 3 meters, his clawed feet carving trenches in the earth. The pain registered, the damage registered, and his body answered. Before the dust from the impact had settled, the cracked scales were regenerating, growing back thicker, denser, and angled to deflect wind pressure rather than absorb it. The aerodynamic architecture of the new growth directed incoming force along the surface and away from structural weak points. What had cracked him once would never crack him again. He wrestled the Shukaku. His hands, massive, scaled, carrying the crushing force of a geological event, grabbed the Biju's arms and held them. The Shukaku thrashed, its tail whipping forward to strike him from behind. The tail hit his dorsal exoskeleton and the scales held, the angled surfaces deflecting the blow along his back rather than letting it penetrate. He pressed forward, driving the Shukaku backward, his feet plowing furrows in the earth. The tailed beast roared and fired another air bullet at point-blank range, directly into his face. His facial scales cracked, reformed, and the second bullet hit reinforced architecture that didn't even chip. He grabbed the Shukaku's jaw with both hands and forced it open, tearing against the compressed sand, his fingers punching into the construct's mouth till he found what he was looking for, Gaara. The boy's unconscious body floated in the center of the Shukaku's forehead, held in place by tendrils of sand. His eyes closed in the sleep that let the beast maintain its form. Naruto reached up with one massive arm and tore Gaara free, ripping through the sand with claws that compressed the grains back into glass on contact, and the Shukaku screamed. Without its Jinchuriki maintaining the connection, the construct began to collapse. Sand rained from the sky in tons, burying the forest beneath a new landscape of dunes. The Shukaku's form disintegrated from the extremities inward, and by the time the head collapsed, Naruto was already shrinking. The process reversed. His body recognized that the threat had been neutralized and began receding, scales retracting, bones shortening, mass reducing. It was less painful than the growth, but still viscerally uncomfortable, like being compressed in a hydraulic press at the cellular level. Within 30 seconds, he was human-sized again, standing in a crater of his own making, holding an unconscious Gaara in one arm, his skin still carrying patches of the black exoskeleton that hadn't fully receded. A sound above. He looked up. Temari was falling. Hit by debris during the Shukaku's collapse, her fan lost somewhere in the destruction, a gash across her forehead streaming blood into her eyes. She'd been too close to the fight. She'd been trying to reach her brother. Naruto moved. His legs, still carrying the enhanced musculature of his macro form, launched him upward. He caught her at the apex of her fall, one arm around her waist, the other still holding Gaara. He landed with both of them, absorbing the impact through legs that had been built to carry 50 tons. Temari's eyes opened. She was disoriented, concussed, bleeding, her pupils uneven in size. She looked up at Naruto's face, at the receding scales, at the inhuman architecture still visible beneath his skin, and she reached up. Her fingers touched his jaw, not flinching, not recoiling, just touching, confirming he was real, confirming he was there, confirming she was alive. "I told you I wouldn't break," she laughed. It was a broken sound, half pain, half genuine amusement, and her fingers tightened on his jaw before dropping away. "You grew as big as a tailed beast. That's cheating, Uzumaki." "Adapting," he corrected. He set her down gently. She stood on unsteady legs, wiping blood from her eyes, and looked at her unconscious brother in Naruto's other arm. The invasion was failing around them. Without the Shukaku, the sand forces had lost their trump card. Konoha's shinobi were pushing back, routing the sound nin, capturing sand operatives left and right. It was over. "Your people will need to surrender," Naruto said. "I know." Temari's voice was tired but steady. She took Gaara from him, hefting her younger brother's weight across her shoulders with the efficiency of someone who had carried him before. She looked at Naruto once more, at the boy who had grown to the size of a building, wrestled a tailed beast into submission, and then caught her out of the sky like she weighed nothing. "Come find me when this is over." "I will." She believed him. She walked into the ruins of the forest with Gaara on her back, moving toward the retreating sand forces, ready to help coordinate the surrender. Naruto watched her go and felt his exoskeleton finish receding, the last scales smoothing into normal skin, the last structural reinforcements settling beneath the surface. His body archived the Bijou fighting configuration for future use, filed it away like a blueprint he could redeploy at will. He was human-shaped again. But the thing inside him, the adaptive core, the evolutionary engine that responded to every threat with a superior solution, carried the memory of being something much larger. The invasion ended. Orochimaru's barrier came down. The third Hokage survived through the intervention of Anbu reinforcements, who breached the technique at its structural weak points. The Snake Sanin retreated with what remained of his forces, his plan in ruins, his trump card neutralized, and in the back of his mind, the persistent, gnawing memory of green gas melting through his facial bones. The village mourned its dead, buried its heroes, and began to rebuild. Naruto stood on the Hokage monument that evening, looking down at the damaged village, the scattered fires, the ant-like movement of shinobi clearing rubble and treating the wounded. He felt the evening air on his skin and registered it as data. Temperature, humidity, wind speed, pollen count, trace particulates. His body was always processing, always preparing, always waiting for the next thing that might try to end him so it could add another layer to the fortress of his flesh. The weeks after the invasion brought political upheaval. The Sand Village, exposed as co-conspirators, negotiated for peace. Tamari came back to Konoha as part of the diplomatic delegation, cleaned up, professional, carrying her fan with the formal restraint of a kunoichi representing her village's interests. But when she saw Naruto across the Hokage's reception hall, that professional mask cracked. Just for a second, a smile that belonged to the woman in the forest rather than the ambassador in the room. He returned it with a nod and the faintest shift of his expression that only she had learned to read as warmth. They spoke that night on the rooftop of the diplomatic quarters. She sat with her legs dangling over the edge, fan beside her, hair loose from its usual four tails. He sat an arm's length away, which was closer than he sat to anyone. "Gaara is changing," she said. "Whatever you did, pulling him out of the shukaku, beating the beast without killing him, it broke something loose. He's been talking, asking questions about what it means to exist without destroying." "Good," Naruto said. "Is that all you have to say? You might have saved my brother's soul and you say good? What else is there?" She shook her head. "You're impossible. I've been told." They sat in silence for a while, the comfortable kind, the kind that didn't demand filling. Two weapons resting. Two forces coexisting without needing to prove anything to each other. When Tamari stood to leave, she put her hand on his shoulder and squeezed firm, strong, a grip that would have bruised a normal person. On him, it registered as pressure and warmth. He let it. "Whatever happens next," she said, "find me. I will." She left. He stayed on the rooftop until dawn, thinking about nothing in particular, feeling the night air cycle through lungs that could process any atmosphere, hearing the heartbeats of every living thing within 100 meters. Somewhere in that radius, he heard hers, steady, strong, unwavering. A heartbeat that refused to quicken with fear in his presence. A rarity worth protecting. But dawn brought trouble. The kind that wore a headband and Sharingan eyes and a chip on his shoulder the size of the Hokage monument. Sasuke Uchiha had been deteriorating since the Forest of Death, since watching Naruto drive off a Sannin through biological supremacy alone, since realizing that the gap between them was measured in species rather than skill. The Uchiha's pride was a living wound, infected and spreading, poisoning every thought with the singular obsession, power. He needed more. He needed it now. He needed it from any source that would give it to him. And Orochimaru, the snake who had marked him as a target, was offering. The Sound Four arrived in Konoha under cover of night. Orochimaru's elite bodyguards, Sakon, Kidomaru, Tayuya, and Jirobo, each carrying a cursed seal and the persuasive argument of promised power. They found Sasuke on the rooftop of the Uchiha compound, brooding over the empty district like a king surveying a dead kingdom. They offered him what Orochimaru offered everyone, strength beyond limits, at the cost of everything else. Sasuke left, walked out of Konoha's gates with 4 enemies at his sides and a forehead protector he hadn't bothered to slash. He was heading toward Orochimaru, toward the power that would let him kill Itachi, toward the one thing he wanted badly enough to betray everyone he'd spent a year learning to tolerate. Sakura found him at the gate. She begged. She cried. She offered everything she had, her loyalty, her love, her willingness to follow him anywhere. Sasuke thanked her. Then he put her to sleep with a precise strike to the back of the neck and laid her on the bench beside the gate. A kindness in his own broken way. The last kindness he planned to show. Tsunade, the new Hokage installed after the invasion, received the report at dawn. Sasuke Uchiha had defected. She assembled a retrieval team. Shikamaru as team leader, Kiba, Neji, Choji, and Naruto. 5 Genin against 4 cursed seal carriers and the last Uchiha. The mission parameters were clear. Bring Sasuke back alive. The unspoken addition, by any means necessary, the team moved fast, pursuing the Sound Force trail through Fire Country's dense forests. They encountered resistance at every stage, each member of the Sound Four peeling off to delay the pursuit, each fight consuming one member of the retrieval team. Choji against Jirobo, Neji against Kidomaru, Kiba against Sakon and Ukon, Shikamaru against Tayuya. One by one, the retrieval team spent itself against Orochimaru's elite, each fight pushing the combatants to their absolute limits. They won, each Konohaginen pulling out reserves they didn't know they had, but they won at the cost of being too injured to continue. Each victory removed one pursuer from the chase, until only Naruto remained. Running through the trees at speeds that cracked branches beneath his feet, his body already in preparation mode, muscles densifying, skin hardening, senses expanding. He could smell Sasuke's trail, the familiar scent mixed with the sulfuric taint of the cursed seal's chakra. He followed it like a bloodhound through 40 kilometers of forest until the trees parted and the world opened into a vast canyon bisected by a river. Two massive statues flanked the waterfall, Hashirama Senju and Madara Uchiha, their stone hands forever locked in a seal of reconciliation above the churning water. The Valley of the End. Sasuke stood on Madara's stone head, his backpack discarded, his hands in his pockets, his Sharingan active and spinning. The cursed seal crawled across the left side of his body, black flame markings that pulsed with a sickly purple chakra. He looked down at Naruto standing on Hashirama's head across the divide, and his expression twisted into something between hatred and anguish. "You came," Sasuke said. "You expected otherwise?" "I expected them to send someone who could stop me." Naruto looked at him, studied the boy he'd spent months tolerating, the rival who had never truly been a rival, the teammate whose ceiling was visible while Naruto's had none. He felt something that might have been pity if his emotional range still extended that far. "Come back," Naruto said. "One chance, one offer, a single moment of mercy before the alternative." Sasuke laughed. The sound was ugly, fractured with rage and insecurity and the desperate fear that drove him toward the only path he could see. "Come back? To what? To watching you become something I can't even comprehend? To being the side character in your story?" His Sharingan flared. "You're a freak, Naruto. I am an Uchiha. My eyes see everything." "Your eyes," Naruto said evenly, "see what has been. Mine become what must be." Sasuke moved. Cursed Seal Stage 1 flooded his system, speed doubling, strength amplifying, chakra reserves expanding. He crossed the distance between them in a burst of movement that would have overwhelmed any Chunin, any standard Jonin even. His fist aimed for Naruto's jaw with killing intent. Naruto caught it, his palm closed around Sasuke's fist like a vice. The Uchiha's eyes went wide. Even with the Cursed Seal boost, even with Sharingan-enhanced perception, Naruto's hand had moved faster than his eyes could track. "Stop this," Naruto said. Sasuke screamed and ignited. Katon, Gokakyu no Jutsu, a point-blank fireball that exploded between them, engulfing both in a sphere of rolling flames. Naruto released Sasuke's hand and let the fire wash over him. His skin, already fireproof since the age of 7, since the warehouse, since the very first adaptation he'd ever developed, barely registered the heat. But Sasuke was already moving, already creating distance, already running through the seals for something bigger. Kaden, Ryuka no Jutsu, Dragon Fire Technique. A stream of concentrated fire lanced from Sasuke's mouth, sustained and focused, hot enough to melt stone. It struck Naruto dead in the chest and he walked through it. His footsteps left molten impressions on the stone beneath him, but his body was untouched. Fire was the first thing he'd ever conquered. It was the most solved problem in his adaptive archive. Sasuke's hands blurred again. Chidori. The sound of 1,000 birds filled the canyon as lightning gathered in the Uchiha's palm, blue-white, crackling, concentrated into a lance of electromagnetic death. He charged. Sharingan tracking every micromuscle in Naruto's body, predicting movement, finding openings. The Chidori drove toward Naruto's chest. Naruto let it come. The lightning-charged hand punched into his torso, through the skin, between the ribs, and into the cavity where his heart should be. Sasuke's arm sank to the elbow in Naruto's chest. The Chidori discharged inside the wound, voltage ripping through internal tissue, cooking organs, stopping the heart. Sasuke's Sharingan watched the light leave Naruto's eyes for a fraction of a second. He'd done it. He'd killed the unkillable thing. Then the flesh moved. Around Sasuke's arm. The muscle fibers, the connective tissue, the very cellular structure of Naruto's interior, it closed around the intruding limb like a trap springing shut. Bone grew over Sasuke's forearm, tissue hardened into a prison of calcified flesh. The Uchiha tried to pull free and couldn't. His arm was locked inside Naruto's ribcage, trapped in a biological vice that no human muscle could escape. Naruto's head lifted. His eyes were alive again, more alive than before, the pupils dilated, the irises carrying a new luminescence. His mouth opened and words came out in that grinding, low-frequency voice that made the stones of the valley vibrate. "You aimed for the heart," Naruto said. He looked down at the arm buried in his chest, at the Uchiha's horrified face, at the Sharingan spinning wildly as it tried to process what it was witnessing. A fatal error. My heart is redundant. And it was. Even as Sasuke watched through the eyes that supposedly saw everything, he could detect, with the Sharingan's ability to perceive internal chakra structures, a second heartbeat. Naruto's body had grown a backup, a secondary cardiovascular pump, positioned behind the liver, connected to the circulatory system by new arterial pathways that hadn't existed 30 seconds ago. The primary heart, the one Sasuke had pierced, was already regenerating around the wound, pushing the Chidori's remaining energy out through the flesh, like a splinter being rejected. The hole in his chest was closing in real time, Sasuke screamed. Fury, terror, and the absolute psychic break of a boy whose entire worldview, the supremacy of the Sharingan, the destiny of the Uchiha, the belief that eyes which see everything confer understanding, collapsed in the space between heartbeats. He activated Curse Seal Stage 2. His body transformed, skin turning gray, eyes going black and gold, massive hand-shaped wings erupting from his back. His chakra output tripled. He tore his arm free of Naruto's chest by brute force, leaving strips of his own skin behind in the calcified trap, and launched himself skyward. He hung above the valley on those wings of corrupted chakra, bleeding from a skinned forearm, panting, his transformed body burning through chakra reserves at an unsustainable rate. He cupped his hands together. Black lightning gathered between his palms, the black Chidori, the flapping Chidori, his ultimate technique elevated by the cursed seal into something that could threaten even the most hardened defenses. "I'll destroy you!" Sasuke roared from above, his voice distorted by the transformation. "I'll erase everything you are!" The black Chidori launched downward, a beam of concentrated black lightning that split the air, the thunderclap arriving after the strike like a divine judgment. It hit Naruto from above, driving him downward through the stone head of Hashirama's statue, through the carved interior, through the bedrock beneath. The valley floor cratered. A column of black energy punched into the earth, and for a long moment, there was nothing visible except the aftermath. A smoking hole where Naruto had been standing, rubble falling into the river, dust obscuring everything. Sasuke descended. His wings beat twice, carrying him down to the lip of the crater. He was shaking. From chakra depletion, from the cursed seal's toll on his body, from the adrenaline crash of having just thrown everything he had at an opponent who had already shown he couldn't die. He peered into the dust, Sharingan piercing the obscuration, looking for remains, looking for evidence that this time, this one time, something he'd done had been enough. The dust cleared. Naruto stood at the bottom of the crater, and he had changed again. His skin had become a reflective surface, a carapace of mirror-finished material that bounced light and chakra alike. The black lightning that had struck him had been absorbed into the carapace and dissipated across its surface, grounded through his feet into the bedrock beneath. The insulating properties he developed against Kakashi's Chidori months ago had evolved again. Upgraded against a stronger variant, refined to handle the cursed seal's corrupted frequency. Scorch marks covered his body, but the tissue beneath was intact. His clothes were gone, burned away by the sustained assault, revealing a physique that was barely recognizable as human. Reinforced musculature visible beneath the carapace, joints armored with protruding bone ridges, his spine extended slightly by additional vertebrae that allowed for greater flexibility. He looked up at Sasuke from the bottom of the crater, and his expression carried nothing. Zero anger. Zero frustration. The blank, absolute certainty of something that has verified, once again, that it cannot be destroyed. He leaped. The crater floor exploded beneath his feet as his enhanced legs drove him upward, 80 meters in a single bound, straight toward the hovering Uchiha. Sasuke tried to react, tried to dodge, tried to bring his arms up in a guard. He was too slow. Naruto's hand closed around his throat in midair, and the force behind the grip was enough to compress stone into powder. They hung in the air for a moment, Naruto holding Sasuke by the throat, Sasuke's wings beating uselessly, his hands clawing at the immovable fingers around his neck. Naruto's carapace reflected Sasuke's own warped face back at him. "You seek power from a snake because you fear the world," Naruto said. His voice was thunder. His grip tightened incrementally. Sasuke's eyes, those vaunted Sharingan eyes that supposedly saw everything, were filling with tears, of pain, of helplessness, of the final, complete understanding that he had never been a rival. He had been a context clue, a measuring stick, a footnote in the story of something that transcended everything he understood about power. "I am the fear of the world," he dropped. Carrying Sasuke downward, accelerating through gravity and his own muscular force, he drove the Uchiha into the valley floor. The impact created a secondary crater inside the first one. Sasuke's cursed seal receded, the transformation failing, his body reverting to its base state as the foreign chakra depleted entirely. He lay in the crater in his normal form, 13 years old, thin, bleeding from a dozen points, his eyes still spinning with a Sharingan that had nothing left to show him. Naruto stood over him. He reached down and took Sasuke's right arm, the arm that had driven the Chidori through his chest, and twisted. The elbow hyperextended. The joint popped, then broke. A compound fracture, the bone visibly deforming beneath the skin. Sasuke screamed, a raw animal sound with nothing dignified about it. Naruto took the left arm next. Same grip, same rotation, same result. Both arms broken at the elbow, the joints destroyed so completely that the hands dangled uselessly, the nerves firing pain signals without any remaining structural support to translate intention into movement. Sasuke couldn't form seals, couldn't mold chakra, couldn't perform any technique in any discipline. He was a swordsman without hands. Why? Sasuke gasped through the pain, tears and snot running down his transformed back face, his eyes still locked on Naruto's reflective carapace. Why won't you let me go? Naruto looked down at him. The carapace was beginning to recede, the reflective surface dimming, normal skin returning beneath it. His body was de-escalating, recognizing that the threat was neutralized, archiving the new adaptations for future deployment. His expression was unreadable. Was there mercy in it? Was there satisfaction? Was there anything at all beyond the absolute pragmatism of a creature that solved problems through superior adaptation? Because you're worth more alive and home than dead and gone, Naruto said. It was the closest thing to warmth he'd offered anyone besides Temari in years. And then he bent, lifted Sasuke's broken body over one shoulder and began walking. The walk back to Konoha took 6 hours. Naruto carried the unconscious Uchiha through 40 kilometers of forest, past the sites of his teammates' battles, past Shikamaru being retrieved by sand reinforcements, past Neji being stabilized by Anbu medics, past Kiba unconscious with Akamaru curled on his chest, past Choji being loaded onto a stretcher. Each of them had given everything. Each of them had paid in blood and broken bones and chakra exhaustion. Naruto carried their victory on his shoulder, the proof that their sacrifices had meaning, that the chain had held, that Sasuke would face Konoha's justice rather than Orochimaru's corruption. He walked through the main gate at sunset. The golden light caught his skin, still carrying a faint reflective sheen from the carapace, still showing the ridge lines of bone armor beneath the surface. Kakashi was waiting at the gate. The copy ninja looked at Naruto, then at the broken boy on his shoulder, then at the hole in Naruto's chest that was still visibly sealing itself shut in slow motion regeneration. He said nothing for a long time. Report? Kakashi finally asked. Mission complete. Target retrieved, both arms broken. He won't be casting anything for a while. His loyalty needs to be evaluated before those heal. Kakashi nodded. There were questions, 1,000 questions about what had happened at the Valley of the End, about the craters that scouting teams would find, about the geological damage visible on satellite-level sensing techniques. Those questions could wait. He took Sasuke from Naruto's shoulder and transferred him to the waiting medical team. The Uchiha was alive. The mission was done. Naruto turned to leave. Kakashi called after him. Naruto, you're injured. He looked down at his chest. The hole was almost closed, only a thin gap remaining where the Chidori had pierced him. The tissue weaving itself shut with the unhurried confidence of a body that knew it had all the time in the world. He looked back at Kakashi. I was injured, past tense. He walked into the village. The streets were lit with evening lanterns, the vendors closing their stalls, civilians heading home with groceries and children, and the comfortable ignorance of people who didn't know that their world's survival was guaranteed by a 13-year-old whose body treated death as a design challenge. Naruto moved through them like a ghost, noticed but avoided, recognized but unremarked upon, existing in the liminal space between monster and guardian that he'd occupied since the warehouse fire 6 years ago. He reached his apartment, climbed the stairs, opened the door, sat on the edge of his bed, and felt the last adaptation settle into place. His chest sealed, his secondary heart beating in sync with his primary, the reflective carapace fully archived beneath normal skin. He was whole. He was always whole. That was the only guarantee his existence carried, and it was the only one that mattered. A tap at his window. He didn't look. He already knew the heartbeat. Tamari climbed through the frame with the ease of someone who'd done reconnaissance on the building hours ago. She was wearing civilian clothes instead of her shinobi gear, a concession to diplomacy, to the late hour, to the fact that what she was doing wasn't official business. Her fan was absent. Her hair was down. She looked younger without the armor of her equipment, and also somehow more dangerous, because the strength that made her formidable wasn't in the fan, but in the spine that refused to bend. She looked at him, at the healing wound on his chest, at the fading lines of adaptation across his body, at the tired set of his shoulders that suggested even unkillable things felt the weight of a long day. You brought him back, she said. I said I would. You broke both his arms. He put his hand through my chest, seemed fair. She crossed the room and sat beside him on the bed, close, her shoulder against his, the warmth of another body, a living, breathing person who chose to be next to him, who saw everything he was and stayed anyway. She didn't ask if he was okay. She knew better. He was always okay. That was the nature of what he was. Instead, she asked a different question. Does it hurt when you change? He considered the question, considered lying, decided against it, because she would know, and because she deserved better than a shield. Every time, he said, every single time, the damage comes first, then the analysis, then the overcoming. The pain is the price. She nodded. Her hand found his, the one that was still slightly scaled from the macro mutation earlier, the skin rough like shark skin beneath her palm. She held it without flinching. Her grip was strong. Her pulse was steady. She wasn't afraid of him. She never had been. When I go back to Suna, she said, this doesn't end. I know. We're going to see each other again. Across borders, across politics, across whatever stupid war some old man decides to start next. You and me. We don't bend. We don't break. We don't, he agreed. She squeezed his hand once, firm, certain, a promise made in pressure, and stood. She climbed back through the window the way she'd come, dropping into the street below with practiced silence. Her footsteps receded into the village sounds, the last heartbeat he tracked as it moved away from him, steady and strong, and heading toward a future that would bring her back to his side again. Naruto sat alone in his apartment. The hole in his chest was fully healed. His secondary heart beat in perfect rhythm with his first. His body carried the archived adaptations of every fight he'd survived. Fire immunity, electrical insulation, aquatic capability, toxin resistance, macro mutation, bone armor, sensory enhancement, chakra immunity, and 100 smaller modifications he'd accumulated without conscious thought. He was 13 years old. He was something the world had never produced before and would never produce again. He was the answer to every question the universe could ask in the language of violence. The night lasted another 6 hours. Naruto spent them on his back, staring at the ceiling, listening to the village breathe around him. 11,000 heartbeats within his range, each one a faint percussive signature against the ambient hum of pipes and insects and wind through eaves. His body was still. His cells were still working. Somewhere beneath the surface of his skin, the adaptations earned at the Valley of the End were integrating themselves into baseline architecture. The reflective carapace stored as a deployable layer, The secondary heart settling into permanent operation? The insulating properties refined down to a molecular sheen across every nerve cluster. He was 13 years old and carrying more archived survival solutions than most species develop across millennia of natural selection. Sleep found him eventually, a shallow, alert rest that kept his sensory net active even as his conscious mind dimmed. He dreamed of nothing. Monsters built to survive everything have no use for the subconscious rehearsal of fear. Jiraiya arrived 3 days later. The Toad Sage, one of the Sannin, Orochimaru's former teammate, a man whose intelligence network spanned the continent, walked through Konoha's gates with his hands in his pockets and his reputation trailing behind him like a shadow. Tsunade had summoned him. The 5th Hokage's orders were straightforward. Take the Uzumaki boy and train him for 2 years outside the village. Make him stronger. Keep him alive. The second instruction was laughable to anyone who'd read the incident reports, but Jiraiya accepted both with the easy confidence of a man who'd survived 3 wars and assumed he could survive anything else. He found Naruto at Training Ground 3 at dawn, standing in the center of a clearing with his hands submerged in a bucket of industrial solvent he'd acquired from somewhere. His skin fizzing at the edges where the chemical ate through the outer layer, his flesh already rebuilding in a compound-resistant configuration beneath. Jiraiya watched from the tree line for 90 seconds before making his presence known. That's a corrosive rated for stripping paint off warships, Jiraiya said, stepping into the clearing. I'm aware. Naruto pulled his hand free. The skin was smooth, unharmed, carrying a translucent sheen that suggested a new protective layer had already integrated. It burns for about 4 seconds now, down from 12 yesterday. Jiraiya studied the boy. The white-haired sage had seen a lot in his decades of wandering, Jinchuriki losing control, cursed bloodlines tearing their hosts apart, forbidden jutsu turning men into monsters. He had never seen a child calmly dissolving his own hand in acid for the purpose of self-improvement. The intelligence reports Tsunade had given him didn't do the reality justice. This wasn't a boy with a healing factor. This was an organism that treated injury as curriculum. We're leaving the village, Jiraiya told him. 2 years, you and me on the road. I'm going to teach you everything I know about sage techniques, sealing theory, and the organization that's hunting you. Akatsuki, Naruto said. He already knew the name, had extracted it from the paralyzed root operative's replacement who'd been far more forthcoming with information after watching his predecessor's career end in a crater. They want the Nine Tails, which means they want you dead or extracted. Either way, you need to be ready. I'm always ready. It came out flat, without arrogance. A statement of observable fact, like noting that water flows downhill. But new stimulus is welcome. I'll come. They left Konoha that afternoon. Naruto packed nothing. He owned nothing worth carrying, and his body provided everything he needed regardless of environment or circumstance. He stopped at the village gate and looked back once. The Hokage monument stared down at him from the mountainside. The streets bustled with civilians who had spent his entire childhood pretending he was invisible or wishing he disappeared. He felt nothing for them. His gaze moved south, toward the desert, toward Suna, toward the steady heartbeat he could no longer detect at this range, but remembered with a clarity that surprised him. 2 years was a long time to be away from the only person whose proximity registered as something other than background noise. He turned and walked through the gate, following the Toad Sage into the wide world beyond Konoha's walls, and the village shrank behind him until it was just a smudge of rooftops and monument stone against the afternoon sky. The training was relentless. Jiraiya pushed him across every conceivable axis. Chakra theory, elemental manipulation, the history and methodology of the Akatsuki's known members, sealing architecture, summoning contracts, espionage tradecraft, and the foundational principles of natural energy. The last proved most interesting. Sage mode, Jiraiya explained, required absolute stillness, the body becoming a receptor for the ambient energy of the natural world, drawing it in, balancing it against internal chakra, and using the resulting fusion to amplify every physical and sensory parameter by an order of magnitude. Most practitioners spent decades learning to hold still long enough. Most failed entirely, their bodies turning to stone when the balance tipped wrong. Naruto's body rejected the standard approach within the first week. His cells had spent 6 years learning to respond to external stimuli, to absorb and integrate and overcome. When natural energy contacted his skin for the first time, drawn by the meditative posture Jiraiya forced him into, his body treated it exactly the way it treated everything else, as input to be processed, analyzed, and incorporated. His skin began absorbing natural energy passively, without concentration, without stillness, without the delicate balance that made Sage Mode so dangerous. His cells simply consumed the energy and wove it into his baseline reserves, the way his immune system consumed Orochimaru's venom. Within a month, natural energy flowed into him the way oxygen flows into lungs. A constant, unconscious intake that required zero effort and carried zero risk of petrification. His eyes gained a permanent amber ring around the iris, a faint, ever-present indicator that Sage Mode wasn't a technique he activated, but a state he existed in continuously. Jiraiya watched this happen and said very little for 3 days. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a tone Naruto hadn't heard from the man before. "You just solved a problem that took the Toad Elders centuries to systematize," Jiraiya said. "Solved it in a month by treating it like a disease your immune system needed to integrate." "Everything is input," Naruto said. "Every force that contacts my body becomes part of my body. Natural energy is a force. Now it's part of me." Jiraiya ran a hand through his hair and laughed, a bewildered, slightly unnerved sound. "Kid, I'm starting to understand why Orochimaru ran from you." The months continued. They traveled across the continent, through the land of Earth's volcanic ranges, where Naruto submerged himself in magma flows, and his skin developed a thermal exchange layer that could weaponize absorbed heat. Through the land of lightning storm peaks, where he stood on exposed ridges during electrical storms and let the bolts strike him, until his nervous system developed the capacity to redirect electrical current through his body and discharge it from his extremities at will. Through the frozen wastes north of Iron Country, where his metabolism learned to generate enough internal heat to function at temperatures that would freeze blood solid in seconds. Each environment was a classroom. Each environmental extreme was a lesson. And his body graduated from every lesson with a new permanent capability added to the archive. Jiraiya taught him combat theory alongside the environmental conditioning, the philosophy of using overwhelming force at the exact moment of maximum leverage, the importance of ending fights in single exchanges rather than prolonged engagements, the strategic value of appearing less dangerous than you are until the moment you decide someone needs to die. Naruto absorbed the philosophy and discarded the parts that didn't apply to him. He had never needed to appear less dangerous. He had never needed leverage. He was the overwhelming force, and every exchange he survived made the next one more one-sided. But the strategic framework was useful. It gave shape to his instincts, turned his raw adaptive superiority into something approaching a fighting doctrine. He thought of Temari often, more often than he expected, more often than his analytical mind could justify with pure logic. Her face appeared in his thoughts during idle moments, the smirk, the challenge in her stance, the pressure of her hand against his before she'd climbed out his window. He wrote to her twice during the 2 years, brief messages carried by Jiraiya's toad summons containing little information and less sentiment because he didn't know how to translate what he felt into words that wouldn't sound clinical or empty. She wrote back once. The letter contained 3 sentences, still unbroken, still waiting, don't make me chase you. He kept the paper in his jacket until rain destroyed it somewhere in the land of rain, and then he kept the words in his memory instead, which was more permanent than paper anyway. 2 years passed. Naruto returned to Konoha at 15, and the village that had been a fishbowl at 13 now felt like a terrarium, enclosed, fragile, populated by organisms that existed at a level of reality so far beneath his own, that engaging with them required a conscious effort to scale his interactions down to human parameters. He was taller, broader. The training and adaptation had built a frame that carried dense, efficient musculature beneath skin that looked normal but functioned as multi-layered armor on a molecular level. His eyes carried that amber ring permanently now, sage energy cycling through him with every breath, every heartbeat. His hair had grown longer, shaggier, partially hiding the predatory architecture of his face, but nothing could hide the way he moved. He walked like gravity was a suggestion he chose to follow out of politeness. The gates of Konoha appeared in the midday sun, and standing in front of them, waiting, leaning against the wooden gate post with her arms crossed and her fan balanced against the wall beside her, was Temari. Older, sharper, her jaw more defined, her eyes harder, her body carrying the lean, powerful build of a kunoichi who had spent 2 years training herself into something that could keep pace with the impossible. Her hair was up in its 4 tails, her headband glinting in the light. And when she saw him on the road approaching, she pushed off the wall and stood straight. Her expression carried a challenge, the way it always did. But beneath the challenge, something warmer moved behind her eyes. Naruto stopped 3 meters from her, studied her the way he studied everything, completely, thoroughly, with the full weight of perception that sage-enhanced senses allowed. Her heartbeat was elevated. Her breathing was controlled, but shallower than her normal resting rate. Her pupils dilated fractionally as she looked at him. His body cataloged all of this as data, and then something deeper than data moved through him. Something his analytical framework couldn't reduce to variables or input-output models. The warmth. The same warmth from 2 years ago, unreduced by time or distance. "You're late," Temari said. "I was thorough. 2 years of thorough." She uncrossed her arms, took 1 step forward. Her eyes moved across his frame, taking in the height, the density, the amber-ringed eyes, the faint subsurface architecture visible at the edges of his jaw and across his knuckles, where bone ridges hadn't fully smoothed away. "You look like you fought a continent and won." "Several, actually." She closed the remaining distance between them and put her hand flat against his chest, over the place where Sasuke's Chidori had punched through, where his secondary heart now beat in permanent tandem with his first. She felt both pulses beneath her palm, and her eyebrows rose a fraction. "2 heartbeats," she said. "That's new. Redundancy, in case someone aims for the first one again." "Did you grow it for me?" The smirk was back. Full force, full challenge, the edges of her mouth curving in that specific way that made the warmth in his chest burn hotter than any environmental adaptation had ever managed to address. "A spare heart, just so you'd always have one beating for me?" He said nothing for a moment. His expression, that flat, unreadable mask of a being that existed beyond normal human emotional range, shifted by a degree. The amber-ringed eyes softened at the corners. His hand came up and covered hers where it rested on his chest, pressing her palm tighter against the twin heartbeats beneath. "Something like that," he said. Jiraiya cleared his throat loudly from 20 meters behind them, and the moment dissolved into Temari, pulling her hand back with a laugh that carried genuine joy, and Naruto turning to give the Toad Sage a look that would have evaporated a lesser man. They walked into the village together, all 3 of them, Temari falling into step Naruto's side with the natural ease of a satellite returning to orbit. She was in Konoha for a week, she told him. Diplomatic rotation, Suna's liaison to Konoha for joint operations planning. The alliance between their villages had solidified after the invasion, cemented by Gaara's transformation into a stabilizing force within Suna's leadership structure. The former Jinchuriki was Kazekage now, the youngest in history, elected on a platform of reform and restraint, his former homicidal instincts channeled into a protective fury that his people had learned to trust. Temari served as his right hand in external affairs, which meant she was in Konoha regularly, which meant the distance between her and Naruto had shrunk from continental to merely inconvenient. They spent 3 of those 7 days together. Training together in the mornings, her wind techniques had grown sharper, her arsenal broader, her base physical capabilities owned to an edge that put most Jonin to shame. She fought him with everything she had, and he let her hit him, because her wind was the one force he'd never fully adapted against. His body could anchor itself, could present 0 wind resistance, could refuse to be moved, but the sensation of her chakra washing over him, of her power battering against his frame, registered as something other than threat. Her attacks felt like contact, like the physical impact version of a conversation between equals. He could have neutralized her wind entirely, could have grown countermeasures that rendered her techniques impotent within seconds. But he chose otherwise. Her strength mattered to him. Her ability to challenge him, even if the challenge could never truly threaten him, was a thing he refused to take from her. On the fourth night, they sat on the same rooftop where they'd spoken after the invasion 2 years prior. The village lights spread below them. The Hokage monument glowed in the moonlight above. Tamari sat close enough that their shoulders touched, and the contact point between them was the warmest place on his body despite the evening chill. "Gaara asks about you," she said. "Whenever I come back from Konoha, the first thing he wants to know is whether you're still—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Escalating." "Always. He says you're the only person he's ever met who might understand what it felt like, being a weapon before being a person, living inside a body designed to destroy everything around it." She turned her head to look at him in profile. "He's wrong, though. You're different from him. He was a prisoner inside the Shukaku's influence. You are the influence." Naruto considered this. She was right. Gaara's power had been imposed on him by a seal and a tailed beast, a foreign intelligence riding his body, using his chakra network as a conduit for someone else's destructive will. Naruto's adaptability came from within. It was him, his cells, his DNA, his evolutionary engine responding to stimuli with an intelligence that transcended conscious thought. There was no parasite to blame, no foreign entity to negotiate with. The monster and the boy were the same organism, inseparable, unified in purpose. "Does that bother you?" he asked. An honest question. Perhaps the most vulnerable thing he'd said to another person in 2 years. Tamari's hand found his again. The same grip, firm, sure, carrying the strength of a kunoichi who could level a forest with a swing of her fan. "If it bothered me, I'd have stopped showing up. Do I look like someone who keeps coming back to things that bother her?" "You look like someone who refuses to acknowledge that anything in the world could bother her." "Same thing, Uzumaki." She squeezed his hand. "Same thing." He almost smiled. The expression lived in the set of his jaw and the angle of his eyes rather than any visible curve of the lips. But she read it anyway, had learned to read his micro-expressions the way shinobi learned to read hidden messages in coded texts. She saw the warmth. She answered it with her own. The 7th day came, and Tamari left for Suna with a promise to return in 6 weeks and a grip on his hand that lingered 3 seconds longer than necessary. Naruto watched her go from the gate, tracked her heartbeat until it passed beyond even his enhanced range, and then turned back to the village to find trouble already waiting for him. Itachi Uchiha and Kasame Hoshigaki stood on the road between the gate and the village proper, positioned with the loose confidence of predators selecting their moment. Itachi, small, contained, his Sharingan already active behind the shadow of his Akatsuki cloak, studied Naruto with an expression that revealed nothing. Kasame, massive, shark-skinned, grinning with those filed teeth, held Samahada's wrapped bulk across his shoulder, the bandages already loosening as the blade sensed Naruto's chakra and strained toward it. "Naruto Uzumaki," Itachi said. His voice was toneless, absent of inflection. "We've been asked to bring you in." Naruto stopped walking. His body was already responding, sage energy concentrating in his limbs, sensory acuity expanding, muscle fiber packing into combat configurations beneath the skin. The amber ring in his eyes brightened until it dominated the iris entirely. "You can try," he said. Kasame moved first. The tailless-tailed beast, a man whose chakra reserves approached Biju level, swung Samahada from his shoulder and drove it forward in a horizontal slash aimed at Naruto's midsection. The blade's bandages shredded as the living weapon sensed the feast ahead and strained to make contact. Samahada connected, the razor-scaled surface grinding against Naruto's torso, ripping through his jacket and finding the skin beneath. The blade latched on, began feeding, began draining chakra at a rate that would have emptied a jonin in seconds. Naruto stood still and let it eat. Kasame's grin widened for 2 seconds, then faltered. Samahada was feeding, the scales flushing with absorbed chakra, the blade swelling with stolen energy. But Naruto's reserves weren't dropping. His body was producing chakra faster than the blade could consume it. Sage energy poured in through his skin from the ambient environment. replenishing what Samahata took and then some. The blade was drinking from an ocean with a teaspoon. After 5 seconds, Samahata began to shudder. The stolen energy was too much, too dense, too saturated with natural power, too incompatible with the blade's storage architecture. The living weapon convulsed. Its scales flattened against the blade in a universal biological signal of distress. It tried to pull away from Naruto's body and couldn't. His skin had formed a gripping layer around the blade's surface, holding it in place, forcing it to keep feeding from a source that was poisoning it with abundance. Samahata screamed, a high-pitched animal shriek that made Kasame recoil. The blade ripped free of its wrappings, tore itself from Naruto's grip, and launched itself away from him, embedding in the ground 10 meters distant, shaking violently, its scales rippling in what could only be described as fear. A sentient weapon that had devoured the chakra of 100 shinobi, that had fought beside the 7 swordsmen of the mist, that was classified as one of the most dangerous artifacts in the elemental nations, running away from its meal. Kasame stared at his abandoned sword. His grin was gone entirely. Itachi's Sharingan shifted. The 3 tomoe in each eye spun and reformed, elongating, merging, becoming the complex pattern of the Mangekyo Sharingan. Tsukuyomi, the most powerful genjutsu in existence, a technique that compressed 72 hours of psychological torture into the span of a single second, that broke minds as thoroughly as explosive tags broke bones. Itachi's eyes locked with Naruto's, and the world vanished, for 1/10 of a second. Naruto's brain, already rebuilt against foreign chakra intrusion since Kakashi's bell test 3 years ago, already carrying neural architecture that treated genjutsu as a pathogen, identified the Tsukuyomi's entry vector and rejected it. His neurons fired in the same cascading pattern that had dismantled the hell viewing technique, but faster now, more efficient, refined by 2 years of additional development. The Mangekyo's signal hit his cerebral cortex and died on contact, its chakra threads severed before they could establish the illusory time frame. 72 hours of torture compressed into 0 seconds of actual effect. Itachi blinked. The Mangekyo spun uselessly in his sockets. The first time in his life the technique had been completely, utterly nullified without the target needing a Sharingan of their own to counter it. Blood leaked from his left eye. The cost of activation paid for nothing. Genjutsu, Naruto said, is a solved equation. Your clan's eyes have nothing to show me that my brain won't reject on principle. Itachi went still in a way that resembled stone more than stillness. Behind those bleeding Mangekyo eyes, a calculation was running, a rapid, genius-level assessment of threat versus objective versus survival probability. Naruto watched the calculation happen in real time. He could see the muscle fibers in Itachi's face twitch as the man processed and reprioritized. Itachi was brilliant, a once-in-a-generation prodigy, a shinobi whose analytical capabilities rivaled anyone in history. And that brilliance was telling him, in no uncertain terms, that this fight could end only one way. "We're leaving," Itachi said. Kasame turned. "What? We haven't even—" "We're leaving." Itachi's tone allowed zero argument. He turned his back on Naruto, a gesture that could have been confidence or desperation, or simply the acknowledgement that facing the boy or showing his back made no difference to the outcome if Naruto decided to close the distance. "Report to leader that the Ninetales vessel exceeds our current extraction capabilities, significantly." They vanished. Kasame reclaimed his traumatized sword and followed Itachi into a shimmering distortion of space-time that suggested they had more exits prepared than just a body flicker. The road was empty again. Naruto stood where he'd been standing, his chakra levels unchanged, his body returning to a resting state without urgency. 2 S-rank shinobi had engaged him and retreated inside 60 seconds without landing a meaningful wound. The gap between himself and the threats arrayed against him was still widening. He walked into the village. 6 weeks until Tamari returned. 6 weeks to continue optimizing while Akatsuki regrouped and decided on their next approach. The next approach came sooner than 6 weeks, and it was aimed at Gaara instead of Naruto. The message arrived by Hawk at 3 in the morning, an emergency dispatch from Suna's border outpost. Kazekage abducted. 2 attackers, one using explosive clay constructs, one using puppet techniques of unmatched sophistication. Akatsuki cloaks confirmed. Gaara had fought them over the village, had shielded Suna from the explosions with his sand, had prioritized his people's survival over his own escape, and had been taken when his chakra finally ran dry from protecting a city of thousands. The hawk carried Tamari's handwriting on the mission request. 3 words at the bottom that weren't part of the official briefing. Come quickly, please. Naruto was moving before the hawk's talons left the windowsill. He hit the ground from his second-floor apartment without using the stairs, his legs absorbing the impact through the reinforced musculature that had become standard. And he crossed Konoha's diameter in under 4 minutes at full sprint, his enhanced legs eating ground in strides that cracked cobblestone. He collected Kakashi, Sakura, and a tracking team at the gate, and they departed for Suna at maximum speed. The journey should have taken 3 days. Naruto made it in 1. He left the team behind without apology, his legs carrying him across the desert at speeds that turned sand to glass beneath his feet from friction alone, his lungs processing the arid air through filters his body had grown during Jiraiya's training in similar terrain. He arrived at Suna's gates with the sunrise, his jacket shredded from windburn, his body steaming in the cool morning air, and Tamari was there, waiting in the pre-dawn glow with her fan on her back and her expression carved from something harder than the sandstone walls behind her. She looked at him, took in the state of him, the windburn, the speed-damaged clothing, the fact that he crossed a continent in hours when the fastest messenger birds took a full day. You ran the whole way, she said. They have your brother. I know. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. She'd exhausted her tears hours ago, and what remained was fury, compressed and contained beneath the professional exterior that was cracking at the edges. They took him southeast. We have a tracking lead. The extraction takes 3 days to complete, so we have time. But her voice caught, just for a second, a fracture in the facade that showed the sister beneath the soldier. If they finish, he dies. They will never finish. Naruto said it with the same flat certainty he applied to every statement about his own indestructibility. An absolute, an axiom, a law of the universe as he intended to enforce it. Tamari nodded once, sharply, and something in her expression settled. The faith she placed in those words was total, and the weight of it registered in Naruto's chest as a responsibility more personal than any mission parameter. He would save Gaara because Gaara was worth saving. He would save Gaara because Tamari had said please in her own handwriting, and that single word had more pull on him than any Hokage's order ever would. The tracking team caught up by noon. Kakashi's summoned hounds picked up the trail, a faint residual of clay and machine oil leading southeast through the rocky wasteland between the land of wind and the land of rivers. They pursued. Naruto led, running at a pace that pushed even Kakashi to his limits, his body metabolizing fatigue toxins faster than they could accumulate, his muscles operating on a surplus of sage energy that made exhaustion a theoretical concept rather than a physical one. They found the Akatsuki hideout on the second day, a massive boulder sealed with a barrier technique hidden in a ravine between 2 cliff faces. The barrier required simultaneous removal at 5 points across the region. The team split to handle it. Naruto waited at the main entrance with the patience of a siege engine, his senses extended through the stone, his hearing picking up the faint vibrations of jutsu being performed inside the sealed cave. The extraction was still in progress. Gaara was still alive. The barrier fell. Naruto hit the boulder with a single punch, his fist wrapped in the same bone-armored, scale-covered adaptation he'd grown against Zabuza years ago, and the rock face exploded inward. 100 tons of stone became gravel in an instant, showering the cave interior with debris and revealing the scene within. Gaara's body suspended between the hands of a massive statue, chakra being pulled from his form in visible streams, his face slack and his breathing shallow. 2 figures in Akatsuki cloaks stood beneath the statue, one sitting on a clay bird with blonde hair falling over one eye, the other hunched inside a puppet shell with a scorpion tail curving overhead. Deidara of the explosion release, Sasori of the red sand, S-rank both of them, artists of destruction in their respective mediums, and utterly unconcerned with the debris raining around them because they'd expected pursuit and planned for it. Ah, Deidara said, grinning, reaching into the clay pouch at his hip. The Jinchuriki himself shows up. Good, saves us a trip, yeah. His hand emerged holding a clay bird, a C2 construct designed for wide area devastation. He launched it before Naruto had taken 2 steps into the cave. The bird expanded midair, growing to the size of a horse, and detonated 3 meters from Naruto's face with a concussive blast that blew the remaining cave structure outward. Rock collapsed. Dust billowed. The sound was apocalyptic. Deidara laughed atop his clay perch, already molding the next construct between his palms. Art is an explosion, and you're the canvas. Naruto walked out of the blast cloud. His skin had shifted in the microsecond before detonation. The shock-dispersing exoskeleton from the warehouse adaptation deploying across his entire frame, combined with the heat-resistant layering and the concussive force redistribution architecture that 6 years of explosion survival had built into his baseline. The C2 had done nothing. A smudge of soot across his chest was the total of its effect. He continued walking toward the statue where Gaara hung suspended, and his expression communicated a simple message to both Akatsuki members. He was here for his friend's brother, and anything between him and that objective was a temporary inconvenience. "Sasori," Deidara said, his grin dying. That didn't work. The puppet master's tail struck from beneath the scorpion shell, a segmented blade coated in poison, driving toward Naruto's spine with the speed and precision of a shinobi who'd been killing since before his targets were born. The blade hit Naruto's back and snapped. The reinforced vertebrae beneath his skin, thickened from the impact at the valley, armored from the training in volcanic terrain, turned the poison-tipped blade into scrap metal on contact. Sasori withdrew the broken weapon and said nothing, but the subtle shift of his puppet shell suggested recalculation. "Go outside," Naruto told Kakashi and Sakura without turning around. "I'll handle the cave. Take the puppet." They moved. Sakura, trained by Tsunade for 2 years, carrying strength that could shatter boulders, followed Kakashi towards Sasori's position, while Naruto set his stance and locked eyes with Deidara overhead. The clay artist was already molding. C1 constructs, dozens of them, small, fast, designed for saturation bombing rather than single large detonations. The theory was sound. If one big explosion failed, maybe 100 small ones would find a gap. Deidara launched the swarm. Naruto erupted upward. His legs, packed with kinetic energy, enhanced by sage amplification, launched him from the cave floor to the ceiling in a single bound, and he punched through the rock above into open sky. The cave's top blew outward in a geyser of stone and dust, and Naruto emerged into the afternoon light, with his body already tracking Deidara's clay bird as it banked in the air overhead. The C1 swarm followed him upward, detonating against his body in a rapid chain. Pop, 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 each blast registering as surface heat and concussive noise that his adaptations had long since rendered irrelevant. He was fireproof. He was blast resistant. He was the worst possible opponent for a man whose entire combat doctrine relied on explosions. Deidara recognized this and escalated. His hands plunged into the clay pouches and emerged with something larger, a dragon construct, C2 grade, with a belly full of landmine spheres. The dragon took flight, circling above Naruto, dropping mines in a carpet-bombing pattern across the sky. Each mine detonated on proximity, a field of explosions that turned the air itself into a kill zone. Naruto rose through it. His body developed micro-adjustments in real time, eardrums thickening to handle the sustained acoustic assault, lungs adapting to the superheated air, retinas adjusting to the constant flash of detonation. He climbed through the explosion field the way a diver ascends through water, steadily, irresistibly, ignoring the medium entirely. He reached the clay dragon's altitude. His arm elongated, the bone blade adaptation from the warehouse resurfacing, extending from his forearm in a single spear of reinforced osseous matter, and he drove it through the dragon's belly in passing. The construct split in half, its structural integrity compromised, and it collapsed downward in a rain of inert clay. Deidara launched from the dragon's back on a smaller bird, pulling distance, already molding something else. "C3!" Deidara screamed, and what formed between his palms was a sphere of compressed clay the size of a man's torso. His masterwork, his village killer, a bomb designed to level everything within 500 meters of ground zero. He threw it straight down, between himself and Naruto, and detonated it at maximum yield. The sky turned white. The air itself ignited in a dome of superheated plasma that expanded outward at supersonic speed, vaporizing everything in its radius: clouds, debris, insects, the residual clay fragments from earlier constructs. The shockwave flattened trees for half a kilometer in every direction and sent Kakashi and Sakura stumbling even at their distance from the blast. The sound was less a noise and more a physical force, a wall of compressed air that arrived after the light and hit the landscape like a divine hand slapping the earth flat. When the plasma dissipated and the air stopped burning, Naruto hung in the sky. His arms were crossed over his chest, and his entire body was covered in a new adaptation, a layer of plasma-resistant material that his cells had synthesized in the microsecond between the detonation signal reaching his enhanced hearing and the actual blast front arriving. The material was white, almost ceramic in appearance, seamless across his skin, radiating residual heat that made the air shimmer around him. Beneath it, he was unharmed. The C3, a bomb rated to destroy a hidden village, had failed to breach his surface layer. Deidara stared from his clay bird, 300 meters distant, and his remaining eye was wide with something that lived in the territory between disbelief and existential horror. His entire life, his art, his philosophy, his definition of beauty and power revolved around the explosive force being the ultimate statement, the unreachable climax, the final word in any argument. And here stood a boy his explosions couldn't scratch. "What the hell are you?" Deidara breathed. "I am everything your art aspired to be," Naruto said, and his voice carried across 300 meters of open air without raising in volume, a resonance trick his adapted vocal cords had developed somewhere in the exchange, producing frequencies that traveled farther and hit harder than any normal larynx could manage. Absolute, inevitable, beyond argument. He closed the distance in a single burst of speed. His hand caught the clay bird's wing and crushed it, compressed clay shattering under a grip that could crack the executioner's blade. Deidara fell. His hand was already in his pouch, reaching for the emergency measure, the final technique, the self-detonation that would turn his own body into a bomb rated beyond C3. His fingers found the clay and brought it to his chest mouth, the one built for exactly this purpose. But Naruto's hand was faster. It closed around Deidara's wrist and tightened until the bones began to grind together. The clay dropped from nerveless fingers. "None of that," Naruto said. He was holding Deidara by one arm at 20,000 feet, the wind howling around them, the bomber dangling above a death that would kill any normal human on impact. "You tried to take someone I've decided to protect. Your explosions bounced off me like rain, and now you want to self-destruct, to make your own death your final masterpiece." He tilted his head. The amber eyes studied Deidara with the interest of something cataloging a resolved specimen. "Your art fails on every level." He threw Deidara toward the ground with force that exceeded terminal velocity. The bomber hit the earth at a speed that left a crater and a stain, a body rendered into component parts by the impact alone, the clay pouches scattering across broken ground without detonation, because the chakra that animated them had died with their creator. The self-destruct was never triggered. The final explosion was never permitted. Deidara of the explosion release died on impact, his art invalidated, his legacy reduced to a smear of clay and organic matter at the bottom of a hole. Naruto landed beside the crater and turned his attention to the cave. Inside, Kakashi and Sakura were engaged with Sasori, the puppet master having emerged from his scorpion shell to reveal a body that was itself a puppet, a preserved human form, converted entirely to a weapon of joints and blades and hidden mechanisms. His 100 puppets, the red secret technique, the army that had conquered a nation, swarmed the cave interior in a storm of bladed limbs and poisoned weapons. Sakura was fighting brilliantly, Tsunade's training evident in every chakra-enhanced blow that shattered puppet frames to splinters. Kakashi's Sharingan tracked and countered the formations that pressed from his flanks. But Sasori's poison was the real threat. The air inside the cave had turned purple, a mist of aerosolized toxin that entered through skin contact and shut down motor functions in seconds. Sakura had taken an antidote from a seal on her arm, prepared in advance by studying Sasori's known compounds. Kakashi was holding his breath. his time limited. Naruto walked into the cave and breathed in. The poison entered his lungs and his bloodstream simultaneously, his body identifying it, analyzing it, and producing the molecular inverse within 4 heartbeats. The same process that had destroyed Orochimaru's venom 3 years prior, now operating faster, more efficiently, reduced to a nearly instantaneous immune response. The toxin died in his blood. His sweat glands began excreting the neutralizing compound into the air around him, clearing a 10-meter radius of poison simply through his presence. The purple mist receded around his body like fog before fire. Sasori's 100 puppets turned their attention to the new target. A wave of bladed constructs descended on Naruto from every angle: swords, spears, serrated limbs, poison needles in clouds of thousands. His exoskeleton activated. The bone armor rose across his frame in interlocking plates, each one angled to deflect rather than absorb, each one carrying a density that turned puppet-grade weapons to scrap on contact. Blades shattered against him. Needles bounced away, unable to find purchase in skin that had evolved past the penetrative capacity of anything in Sasori's arsenal. He walked through the puppet army the way fire walks through a wheat field, steadily, inevitably, leaving destruction in his wake. He reached Sasori. The puppet master's artificial body launched its final defenses: a blade from the stomach, coils of razor wire from the arms, a jet of concentrated flame from the palm. All of it bounced, burned, and broke against Naruto's adapted frame. He grabbed the puppet body by what had once been its throat and lifted it until the core, the cylinder of sealed flesh that contained Sasori's heart, the only organic component that remained, the anchor of his continued existence, was level with his eyes. 100 puppets, Naruto said. A nation's worth of poison. A body rebuilt to avoid death. His grip shifted, his fingers finding the seams in the puppet frame, the joints where wood met mechanism, the structural points that connected the false body to the core. And you still couldn't solve the fundamental problem. You're fragile where it matters. His hand crushed inward. The puppet frame collapsed around the core like a tin can under a hydraulic press. That and the heart cylinder, armored in seals and hardened wood and layered protections that had preserved Sasori's consciousness for decades, cracked under the pressure of fingers that could dent legendary swords. The core split. The chakra that animated it dispersed. Sasori of the Red Sands ceased to exist in any meaningful sense. His consciousness scattered, his puppet army falling to the cave floor as inert wood and metal without the chakra threads that had made them move. Naruto dropped the remains and walked to the extraction statue. Gaara hung between its stone hands, breathing shallowly, the tailed beast extraction less than a quarter complete. The streams of chakra being pulled from his body were fading, the statue's power diminishing without its operators to maintain the technique. Naruto reached up and pulled Gaara free, snapping the chakra tethers with his bare hands the way a man breaks cobwebs in a doorframe. The Kazakaji's body was limp, his breathing dangerously shallow, his chakra reserves depleted to critical levels, but he was alive. His tailed beast was still sealed within him, the extraction incomplete, the Shukaku's power weakened but present. Naruto carried him out of the cave and into the daylight where Kakashi and Sakura waited. Beyond them, visible at the ravine's entrance, Temari was running, full sprint across the rocky terrain, her fan abandoned somewhere behind her because it slowed her down and she needed to see her brother breathing more than she needed to be armed. She reached them and her hands found Gaara's face, feeling for warmth, checking for pulse, her fingers pressing against his neck with a desperation that made her knuckles white. "He's alive," Naruto told her. "The extraction failed. He'll recover." Temari exhaled, a sound that carried the weight of 3 days of compressed terror releasing all at once, her shoulders dropping, her spine curving forward over her brother's unconscious form in Naruto's arms. She pressed her forehead against Gaara's and said nothing for a long moment. When she lifted her head, her eyes were wet, and she looked at Naruto with an expression that went beyond gratitude into territory that had its own gravity. "You ran across a continent for him," she said. "I ran across a continent for you," he corrected. "He was just at the end of the route." She laughed, wet, broken, genuine, and reached up to touch his face. Her palm rested against his jaw, thumb tracing the hard line of bone beneath skin that could resist plasma detonations. Her heartbeat was fast, and for once it carried something other than combat adrenaline. It carried the specific, recognizable pattern of a person looking at someone they love and feeling the full weight of that word for the first time. She kissed him. In front of Kakashi and Sakura and the smoking ruins of an Akatsuki hideout with her unconscious brother in his arms. Brief. 3 seconds. Firm pressure. The taste of desert salt and adrenaline, and then she pulled back, and her expression dared him or anyone else in the world to comment on it. He said nothing. His amber-ringed eyes were wider by a fraction of a degree, the only indicator that she'd managed to produce a reaction his body hadn't predicted and adapted for in advance. "I've been wanting to do that for 3 years," she said. "Now stop looking at me like I just surprised the unsurprisable." Gaara stirred in Naruto's arms, and the moment dissolved into medical urgency and tactical withdrawal and the long journey back to Suna. But the warmth in Naruto's chest, that irreducible, adaptation-proof sensation, had grown by an order of magnitude, and he carried it all the way across the desert like a second heartbeat added to the 2 he already possessed. Gaara recovered within the week. Suna's medical corps stabilized him, replenished his chakra, and confirmed the Shukaku's continued presence within his seal. The Kazekage sat up in his hospital bed 4 days after extraction, his sand swirling weakly around his hands as his strength returned, and the first words out of his mouth were directed at the blonde-haired figure standing at the window of his room. "You saved me," Gaara said. "Your sister asked." "She does that." A pause, the faintest shift at the corner of Gaara's mouth, an expression that might have been a smile on anyone who'd had more practice making them. "Thank you." Naruto nodded once and said nothing else. He left the hospital room, left Suna, left the desert, and returned to Konoha, carrying 2 new resolved combat solutions in his archive: aerial engagement against bombing techniques and rapid neutralization of aerosolized toxins, plus the molecular memory of Tamari's lips against his, which his body stubbornly refused to file under any clinical category. The months that followed brought Akatsuki into sharper focus. Intelligence from Jiraiya's network painted a grim picture. 9 members at the organization's peak, each S-rank, each paired for maximum tactical synergy. Deidara and Sasori were gone, neutralized in the Gaara retrieval. Itachi and Kasame had retreated after their encounter at Konoha's gates. 5 remained active: Hidan, Kakuzu, Pain, Konan, and Zetsu, plus Tobi, the masked figure whose identity and capabilities remained unclear in every report. Hidan and Kakuzu made themselves known next. They hit a fire temple on the border of Fire Country, slaughtering the monks for bounties, Kakuzu's obsession with money driving their target selection. Naruto joined the response team alongside Shikamaru, whose teacher Asuma had fallen to Hidan's curse ritual in a previous engagement. The Nara genius wanted revenge. Naruto wanted resolution. They found the pair in a rocky clearing, Hidan swinging his triple-bladed scythe with manic glee, Kakuzu looming behind with his stitched body and stolen hearts, 5 masks arrayed behind him like a wall of elemental death. Hidan saw Naruto and grinned. Wide, unhinged, the smile of a religious fanatic who believed his god made him immortal. "Another sacrifice for Jashin," Hidan cackled, licking the blade of his scythe. "I'll drain your blood, draw my circle, and link our suffering together until—" "No," Naruto said. 1 word, 1 syllable, delivered with finality. Hidan's scythe found Naruto's forearm on the first swing, a drawing cut, enough to wet the blade with blood. The zealot retreated to his prepared circle, already licking the crimson from the metal, already activating the ritual that would bind Naruto's physical state to his own. He drew the Jashin symbol in the earth with his foot, stepped into its center, and plunged a retractable pike into his own chest. The ritual was complete. Any damage Hidan inflicted on himself would manifest on the linked target. It was an absolute kill technique, irresistible, unavoidable once the blood link was established. Nothing happened to Naruto. Hidan stared, pulled the pike out and stabbed again. Through his abdomen this time, a wound that would perforate intestines and cause septic death in hours. He watched Naruto's body for any sign of transferred damage. There was none. The blond boy stood in the clearing with his arms at his sides, looking mildly interested the way a researcher looks at a failed hypothesis. Your ritual is a chakra-based curse conveyed through blood consumption? Naruto said. My blood chemistry altered the moment it left my body. The sample your tongue collected was already neutralized. The cellular markers it carried had self-destructed upon atmospheric exposure. You linked yourself to dead blood. You're hurting yourself for nothing. Hidan's expression underwent a journey, from confusion to denial, to the dawning horror of a man who just realized his immortality ritual had a counter, and it was standing 15 feet away looking bored. He screamed and charged with his scythe raised, abandoning the ritual entirely for brute force. Naruto caught the scythe by the blade, his palm closed around the triple edges without cutting, his skin too hard for the sharpened steel to penetrate, and snapped it in half with a rotation of his wrist. The broken halves clattered to the ground. Shikamaru took over. His shadows snaked across the clearing, catching Hidan's limbs and holding the immortal in place, while Naruto turned his attention to Kakuzu. The five-hearted monster was already engaging, his body separating into segments connected by threads, 4 of his 5 hearts detaching as independent elemental masks that moved with autonomous purpose. A fire mask launched a concentrated blaze, a wind mask generated a vortex, a lightning mask discharged a bolt, a water mask produced a pressurized lance. All 4 attacks converged on Naruto from cardinal directions simultaneously. He stood in the convergence point and let them hit. Fire washed over fireproof skin. Lightning grounded through insulating tissue into the earth. Water pressure broke against bone armor that exceeded the PSI of the technique. Wind found 0 flat surfaces to grip. 4 elements struck him and achieved nothing. 4 solved equations. 4 adaptations long since archived. 4 attacks that his body had graduated from before this fight began. Kakuzu's remaining heart, his primary, housed in his stitched torso, pulsed with alarm as the masked man watched his entire arsenal fail against a single target. He tried to retreat, pulling his elemental masks back into his body, stitching himself together for flight. Naruto gave him 3 seconds, enough time to understand that escape was the correct response. Enough time to feel the fear. Then he moved. 1 step closed 20 meters, his leg muscles firing in the kinetic burst pattern that cratered Earth. His hand punched through Kakuzu's chest, bypassing the stitched hide entirely, driving through the patchwork body with fingers that could crack stone. He found the first heart and crushed it. Kakuzu screamed, a gargled, inhuman sound. Naruto withdrew his arm and struck again, the second heart. Again the third, again the fourth, again the fifth. 5 hearts destroyed in 5 strikes spanning 2 seconds, each one pulped between fingers that closed with the force of continental drift. Kakuzu's stitched body collapsed, truly dead for the first time in nearly a century. All 5 lives spent in a sequence too fast for any of them to matter. Behind him, Shikamaru had completed his work. Hidan, immortal but helpless without his ritual and with his body immobilized by shadows, was bound and separated. Shikamaru's explosive tags detonated in a pit specifically dug for the purpose, burying the zealot's dismembered parts beneath tons of earth in a grave he would never escape. Immortal, yes. Capable of functioning when scattered across a collapsed hole and buried under a mountain of rock? Never again. It was elegant in its simplicity, a cage that required no maintenance and offered no exit, designed by a genius who understood that some enemies couldn't be killed, but could certainly be made irrelevant. Naruto watched Shikamaru complete the burial and offered a single nod of acknowledgement. 2 more Akatsuki members removed from the equation. 5 remained. The next would bring the entire war to Konoha's doorstep. The months between Kakuzu's death and Pain's invasion passed in a blur of preparation that Naruto barely noticed. He trained, he adapted. He pushed himself into increasingly extreme environments. A week at the bottom of a lake, breathing through gills alone, testing his body's capacity for indefinite aquatic survival. 3 days buried alive in a sealed coffin, forcing his metabolism to survive on 0 atmospheric oxygen by developing an internal recycling system that extracted breathable gas from his own CO2 output. An afternoon standing in the path of a controlled forest fire, while volunteers from the Anbu Corps confirmed that his heat absorption layer could now convert thermal energy directly into stored chakra. Every session added another capability. Every day made the next threat less relevant. Tamari visited twice during that period. Official diplomatic business stretched thin to allow personal time, stolen hours on rooftops and training grounds, conversations that grew longer and more substantial each time. She told him about Suna's reconstruction, about Gaara's progressive reforms, about the intelligence suggesting Akatsuki's desperation was increasing as their numbers dwindled. He told her less about his training and more about the spaces between it, the moments of stillness that felt foreign, the unfamiliar experience of wanting someone's presence rather than needing their stimulus. She read between the lines of what he said and understood the words he couldn't form. On her second visit, she stayed the full night. They sat on his apartment floor. His bed was too small for two people, and his furniture consisted of nothing else, with their backs against the wall and her head resting against his shoulder. Her heartbeat was the slowest he'd ever heard it, a resting rate that spoke of absolute safety, of complete trust in the proximity of something the rest of the world was right to fear. He let himself exist in that trust without analyzing it. It was the closest thing to peace his mind had experienced since the warehouse explosion at age 7. "After this is over," she said into the silence. "After Akatsuki is gone and the world stops trying to tear itself apart, I want something." "What?" "You, in one place, for longer than a week at a time." She turned her head to look up at him. "I want mornings. I want boredom. I want to fight you every day and sleep next to you every night and build something that outlasts the war." He looked down at her, the amber-ringed eyes, the face that carried more predatory architecture than human softness, the jaw that could extend into something monstrous when threat demanded it, all of it aimed at her with an expression that was, for once, unguarded, vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with physical weakness. "When this is over," he said, "I'll give you that." She turned her face into his shoulder and said nothing else, and they sat in silence until dawn crept through the window and the village began to stir beneath them. Pain came on a Tuesday that felt like any other until it didn't. The first Shinra Tensei hit Konoha's outer wall at dawn, a gravitational pulse that flattened 100 meters of fortification like paper crushed in a fist. The alarm went up. The second pulse hit the merchant district. The third took the hospital's east wing. By the time the fourth struck, the village was awake and panicking. Civilians streaming toward the shelters carved into the Hokage monument, shinobi deploying to defensive positions, Anbu moving in coordinated teams toward the source of the devastation. 6 bodies, 1 mind. The 6 paths of pain descended into Konoha like a judgment passed by someone who believed they had the right to judge. The Deva path at the center, Yahiko's preserved corpse, ringed eyes of the Rinnegan staring outward with a god's borrowed indifference. The Ashura path behind it, a weaponized construct of mechanical limbs and concealed armaments. The animal path summoning creatures of impossible scale. The human path ripping souls from bodies with a touch. The Preta path absorbing jutsu with open palms. The Naraka path restoring damage to the other 5 through the King of Hell. Konoha's shinobi engaged and died. Kakashi fell against the Deva path, Shinra Tensei crushing him beneath rubble after a fight that pushed the copy ninja to his absolute limit and still wasn't enough. Shizune fell to the human path, her soul extracted in an instant, her body crumpling without the animating force that made it alive. Chunin teams broke against the Asura path's missile salvos. The village burned. Naruto felt it from the training ground where he'd been pushing himself through another adaptation drill. The ground shook. The air carried the sharp tang of blust and detonation residue. His sage-enhanced senses painted a picture of destruction spreading from the village center outward, heartbeats ceasing by the dozen, structures collapsing, the signature of a gravitational manipulation technique unlike anything in his archive. New stimulus. Something he hadn't encountered before. His cells began preparing. He arrived at the village in 90 seconds. What greeted him was a landscape of ruin, buildings reduced to rubble, streets cratered, fires burning in every district. Shinobi bodies scattered among the debris, civilians trapped beneath collapsed structures, screaming. And at the center of it all, standing on the remains of the Hokage Tower, the 6 paths of pain arranged in formation, their Rinnegan eyes scanning the village for the target they'd come to retrieve. Naruto landed in the main thoroughfare with an impact that cracked the already damaged pavement, and 6 pairs of Rinnegan eyes turned to face him simultaneously. The Devapath spoke, a voice that carried no emotion, no humanity, only the cold philosophy of a man who'd convinced himself that suffering was wisdom and destruction was necessary. Naruto Uzumaki, I've come for the Nine Tails. You've come to die, Naruto said. The Ashura path moved first. Its body split open, torso expanding to reveal concealed missile launchers, arms transforming into blade-tipped projectile rails, a walking weapons platform unleashing its full arsenal in a sustained barrage. Rockets, blades, saw teeth, and concussive shells. A wall of mechanized death screaming toward Naruto at hypersonic velocities. He walked into it. The missiles detonated against his exoskeleton, deployed in the microsecond between launch and impact, and achieved nothing beyond noise. The blades shattered against bone-armored forearms. The concussive shells bounced off his chest like pebbles thrown at a mountainside. He reached the Ashura path in 3 strides and dismantled it. His hands, strengthened beyond any reasonable material standard, tore the mechanical body apart at its joints. Arms pulled free of shoulders with a shriek of rendered metal. The torso ripped in half along its concealed seams. The head came free with a twist that would have severed any spine, mechanical or organic. The Asura path fell in pieces, its Rinnegan eyes dimming as the animating signal from Nagato lost its vessel. The animal path slammed its hands together. Kuchiyose no Jutsu. A cloud of summoned smoke erupted behind the formation, and from it emerged a menagerie of impossible scale. A giant rhino, a 3-headed dog, a massive bird with wing-mounted blades, a chameleon the size of a house. The summons charged in coordination. 6 tons of divine beast aimed at Naruto from multiple angles. Naruto's body escalated. His musculature swelled, the same kinetic burst configuration that had once cratered training grounds, and he met the rhino head-on. His hands caught the creature's horn, his feet driving trenches in the street as the momentum transferred through his frame. He stopped the charge dead, held the creature the weight of a building motionless through brute structural force, then lifted and threw, sent the rhino sailing overhead to crash through 3 buildings behind him in a cascade of dust and broken stone. The 3-headed dog received a single punch that separated its central head from its body, the regenerating beast unable to compensate fast enough before Naruto's 2nd and 3rd strikes removed the remaining heads. The bird dove, and he leaped to meet it, catching a wing in each hand and pulling in opposite directions until the summon dismissed itself rather than be torn apart. The animal path summoned more. Naruto destroyed them as fast as they appeared, a cycle of summoning and annihilation that lasted 30 seconds before he broke the cycle by crossing the distance to the path itself and driving his fist through its chest. The body dropped, 2 paths down. The human path approached from behind, its hand extended, reaching for the back of Naruto's head, the soul-ripping technique activated and hungry. The fingers touched his skull. Nothing happened. The human path tried again, pressed its palm flat against Naruto's head, and pulled with the full force of the Rinnegan's most invasive technique. The soul extraction jutsu hit Naruto's central nervous system and found a consciousness so deeply integrated into its physical substrate, so fundamentally unified with the cellular architecture that housed it, that the technique could find no separation point. There was no gap between soul and body to exploit. His consciousness existed at the cellular level, distributed across trillions of adapted cells, rather than housed in a single extractable core. The human path might as well have tried to pull the wetness from water. Naruto turned his head slowly, looked at the hand on his skull, then at the path's face. "I feel the damage," Naruto said, and his voice carried that grinding resonance, the one that vibrated stone, the one that communicated on frequencies below human hearing, the one that made brave men feel their bladders weaken. "I analyze it. I overcome it." His hand closed around the human path's wrist and twisted until the forearm became geometry that elbows were never designed to accommodate. The path fell. 3 down, the Preta path rushed forward, hands raised, the chakra absorption barrier blazing outward in a dome of devouring force. Every technique, every chakra construct, every energy-based attack directed at it would be consumed and nullified. an absolute defense against ninjutsu of any element or classification. Naruto looked at it and did nothing chakra-based. He simply punched. A physical strike, pure muscle, pure bone, pure kinetic energy with zero chakra enhancement. The Pretapath's absorption barrier had nothing to absorb, and the fist that crashed through its sternum was made of matter rather than energy. The barrier was irrelevant against a blow that was simply faster and harder than the body beneath it could survive. The Pretapath crumpled, 4 down, 2 remaining, the Naraka path, which served as the resurrection engine for the others, and the Deva path, which carried the gravitational manipulation that had leveled the village. The Naraka path was already working, summoning the King of Hell, a massive spectral construct that could repair damaged paths by consuming and reconstituting their bodies. The Asura path was being reconstructed inside its maw, the mechanical body knitting itself back together. Naruto closed the distance in a single step and drove both arms into the King of Hell's spectral mouth, his flesh interacting with the spiritual construct the way his cells interacted with everything else, adapting to the metaphysical frequency of the entity and finding its structural integrity as solvable as any physical material. He tore the King of Hell apart from the inside. The spectral entity dissipated with a wail that shook the spirit world, and the Naraka path beneath it died instantly. Its connection to the resurrection technique severed, its purpose nullified, its body dropping like a puppet with cut strings, 5 down. The Deva path remained. It stood alone on the rubble of the Hokage Tower, Rinnegan eyes studying Naruto with the cold assessment of a mind that had calculated the probability of this outcome and found it acceptable. Nagato, the true body, hidden somewhere outside the village, channeled everything through this one remaining vessel. The full weight of the Rinnegan's gravitational manipulation focused through Yahiko's preserved corpse. "You are strong," the Deva path said, "stronger than anything I've encountered. But strength alone does not understand pain." "I've understood pain since I was 7 years old," Naruto said. "It taught me nothing except how to grow beyond it." The Deva path raised its hands. Shinra Tensei, the almighty push. But this time, at maximum output, every ounce of Nagato's remaining power channeled through the technique, the gravitational repulsion expanding outward from the Deva path in a sphere of absolute force that would flatten everything in a kilometer radius. The technique that had already destroyed half the village now aimed to erase what remained. The sphere hit Naruto. The gravitational force pressed against his body from every direction, an omnidirectional push that tried to fling every molecule of his being outward, to scatter his cells across the landscape, to disintegrate him through sheer repulsive force. His exoskeleton cracked along a dozen stress lines. His feet left the ground. He felt himself being pushed backward, felt the force trying to undo the structural bonds that held his body together. His cells responded. Deep within his torso, a new organ formed. Something that had never existed in any biological system before. Something his evolutionary engine invented in the span of a single desperate heartbeat. A gravitational counterweight. A dense core of adapted tissue that generated its own attraction field, pulling his body inward, holding his cells together, creating a pocket of resistance against the Rinnegan's repulsive force. The organ pulsed once, twice, and the Shinra Tensei broke against him like a wave against a jetty. The force washed past on all sides, flattening the landscape around him in a perfect circle of destruction. But he remained standing at the center of it, the only vertical thing in a new crater that stretched 500 meters in every direction. The Deva path stared. For the first time, something other than cold philosophy lived behind those Rinnegan eyes. Something that recognized the face of a problem without a solution. Naruto moved. The counterweight organ had given him more than just resistance. It had given him insight into gravitational manipulation at a biological level. His body understood the frequency of the force that had attacked it. And what his body understood, his body could replicate. He raised one hand toward the Deva path and pushed. A wave of gravitational repulsion that erupted from his palm in a concentrated lance, generated by his own tissue rather than any Rinnegan technique, produced by the same adaptive miracle that had turned Orochimaru's venom into his own weapon. The Deva path left the ground. Launched backward by its own technique reflected through biological innovation, Yahiko's preserved body flew through the air like a doll thrown by a child and hit the cliff face of the Hokage monument with enough force to embed itself 3 meters deep in the stone. The Rinnegan eyes flickered, Nagato's connection strained by the damage to his primary vessel, and Naruto was already there, already crossing the distance, already arriving at the impact point, already pulling the broken path from the stone with one hand around its throat. "Your god complex," Naruto said, holding the broken Deva path at arm's length, "ends here. Tell me where you are." The Deva path smiled. Even broken, even beaten, even with 5 of 6 bodies destroyed, the puppet smiled with the conviction of someone who believed in their own righteousness to the exclusion of all evidence. "In a tree," the path whispered, "on a paper mountain, where the rain never stops." Naruto dropped the body. It hit the ground and didn't move, the animating signal finally dying as Nagato withdrew his connection from a vessel too damaged to maintain. 6 paths destroyed. The invasion force neutralized. The village, what remained of it, safe. But Nagato was still alive, still out there, still carrying the Rinnegan and the power to create new paths, to launch new invasions, to rain new destruction on anyone he decided deserved his judgment. Naruto's sensory range, expanded to its maximum, sage energy amplifying every input channel, found the signal. A single powerful chakra source on the outskirts of the village, hidden in a construct of paper and metal, broadcasting the control signal that had animated all 6 bodies. He followed it. He found Nagato in a hollow tree on a paper mountain, exactly as described. The real body was emaciated, pinned to a mechanical walker by chakra-transmitting rods, his red hair hanging lank around a face that was more skull than flesh. Konan stood beside him, blue-haired, amber-eyed, a origami angel guarding her dying god. She moved to intercept, and Naruto looked at her with an expression that communicated, without words, that she was irrelevant to the outcome, and her best option was to step aside. She stepped aside. She was wise enough to recognize when a force of nature could be weathered and when it could end you. Nagato looked at Naruto from his walker, Rinnegan eyes meeting amber-ringed ones across a distance of 5 meters. 2 beings who understood suffering and had drawn different conclusions from it. One had chosen to inflict pain on others. One had chosen to transcend it entirely. "You carry the 9 tails," Nagato said. His voice was a thin rasp, barely human. "You carry the tool of war that killed my parents, destroyed my village, created me, and yet you choose to protect the system that wielded it." "I choose nothing about systems or villages or history," Naruto said. "I protect the people I decide to protect. Everything else is background. And if I told you that my pain, my purpose, was to create a weapon so terrible that war itself would become impossible, that I destroyed to end all destruction, I would tell you that your biology is fundamentally flawed," Naruto said. The callback landed like a hammer on stone. "You built a philosophy on pain because pain was the first stimulus you understood. You never grew past it. You never adapted. You stayed broken at the point of first impact your entire life." He took 1 step closer. His voice dropped to the grinding register that made Nagato's walker vibrate on its supports. "I was broken before I could read, and I became this. What's your excuse?" Nagato stared at him for a long time. The Rinnegan spun in sockets that were too deep in a skull too thin, and behind those godlike eyes, something shifted. Something broke that had been holding the whole architecture of rage and righteousness together for decades. The old man, and he was old, in spirit if not in years, looked at the boy who had surpassed his power, dismantled his philosophy, and offered him nothing except the blunt truth of superior existence, and he made a choice. "Gedo Art of Rinne Rebirth," Nagato whispered, and his hands formed a seal. The technique cost him everything, his remaining life force. Already a guttering candle poured outward through the Rinnegan in a wave of green light that rolled across the village like a tide. Everywhere it touched, the dead stirred. Hearts restarted, lungs refilled. Shinobi who had fallen to the 6 paths opened their eyes and found themselves alive in a world that hadn't deserved to keep them. Kakashi gasped awake beneath a pile of rubble. Shizune's eyes snapped open. Dozens of Konoha's fallen returned to consciousness, pulled back from beyond by a god's last act. Nagato died. His body, already more machine than man, already maintained only by the stubbornness of his will, slumped in the walker and went still. The Renegade's light faded from his eyes. Conan caught him as he fell forward, her paper wings unfurling to cushion his final rest, and she looked at Naruto with an expression that balanced grief and gratitude in equal measure. "He listened to you," she said. "In the end, he listened." "He had to," Naruto said. "I gave him nothing else to do." He left them there, Conan cradling her dead partner in a paper tomb at the edge of a village he tried to destroy, and walked back into Konoha. The village was rubble. The landscape was a crater. But the people were alive, and that was the parameter that mattered. He walked through the devastation, and the survivors saw him, saw the boy who had fought a god and won, who had dismantled 6 bodies in minutes, who stood in the center of the destruction without a mark on his frame while everyone around him was bleeding or buried. They looked at him differently now. The fear was still there, would always be there, buried in the base of their spines, an animal recognition of apex predation, but layered over it was something new, something that looked like the beginnings of faith. The world convened. 5 Kaj, 1 summit, and a masked man calling himself Madara Uchiha, standing in the chamber declaring his intention to enslave the planet. The Eye of the Moon plan, cast an infinite genjutsu across the world using the 10 tails as a medium, trapping every human mind in a dream of perfect satisfaction, while their bodies rotted in cocoons of divine tree matter. A plan so vast in its ambition and so absolute in its cruelty that even Kage-level shinobi, people who had seen horrors most humans couldn't imagine, sat in stunned silence as the masked man outlined it. Naruto attended the summit as Konoha's representative combatant, a concession by Tsunade that acknowledged the reality of his position. He was no longer classifiable by standard rank. Genin on paper, Kage in capability, something else entirely in truth. He sat at the back of the chamber and said nothing while the politicians argued and the masked man threatened, his amber-ringed eyes taking in every person in the room and assessing them the way he assessed everything, as variables, data points, potential sources of stimulus that might or might not warrant his attention. The summit was interrupted. White Zetsu, plant creatures, clone organisms spawned from the god tree's cellular material, infiltrated the building in dozens, their shape-shifting abilities allowing them to impersonate guards, aides, even Kaj bodyguards. The infiltration was discovered when a clone tried to assassinate the Mizukage and was intercepted by her guard. Chaos erupted. Zetsu clones throughout the building revealed themselves and attacked. Naruto moved through them like a scythe through grass. His sage-enhanced senses identified the clones instantly, their cellular composition different from human tissue in ways that were obvious to his adapted perception, their heartbeats carrying a botanical rhythm instead of a mammalian one. He killed 14 of them in the span of 20 seconds, each one dispatched with a single strike that ruptured the plant matter of their construction beyond the regenerative capacity of their design. The Kage watched. The Raikage with his lightning-enhanced speed, the Tsuchikage with his particle-style jutsu, the Mizukage with her corrosive vapor, the Kazekage with his sand, and each of them registered what they were seeing. A 15-year-old boy clearing a room of infiltrators with the casual efficiency of someone swatting insects. The speed was wrong. The power was wrong. The utter absence of effort was wrong. That, the Raikage said after the last clone fell, his massive arms crossed, his expression caught between respect and wariness, is what Konoha has been hiding from the rest of the elemental nations. He's what killed Pain, Gaara said from his Kazekage seat, and his voice carried the weight of personal testimony. He's what stopped the Shukaku. He's what Akatsuki is afraid of. The summit concluded with a unanimous decision. The 4th Shinobi War was declared, a united front of all 5 nations against the masked man's plan. The allied shinobi forces would deploy 80,000 combatants across multiple fronts. Naruto would be placed on the primary front, the one facing the masked man directly, because there was nowhere else that made strategic sense. You put your strongest piece where the enemy was strongest. That was basic strategy. The war mobilized within weeks. The allied forces divided into divisions, close range, mid-range, long range, surprise attack, and intelligence, and deployed across the continent to meet the enemy's white Zetsu army head-on. 100,000 plant clone soldiers spawned from the Earth itself, supplemented by Edo Tensei, the impure world reincarnation technique deployed at scale by Kabuto Yakushi, raising dozens of legendary shinobi from the dead as immortal, regenerating puppets bound to fight against their will. Naruto's front saw the worst of it. Reanimated legends appeared out of nowhere, each one carrying the full technique set of their living days, each one indestructible thanks to the Edo Tensei's regeneration, each one needing to be sealed rather than killed because they couldn't die. He fought them one after another. The Gold and Silver Brothers, Jinchuriki of a fragment of the Nine Tails, wielding the Sage of Six Paths legendary tools. Naruto's body absorbed the tool's effects, the Soul Word technique, the sealing rope, the recording fan, treating each legendary artifact as another stimulus to adapt against and overcome. He sealed both brothers in under a minute using adaptations their techniques had accidentally taught his body. The second Tsuchikage, Mu, wielder of particle-style jutsu that could disintegrate matter at the molecular level. The technique hit Naruto once, erasing a section of his left shoulder down to nothing. His body responded by growing matter from the edges of the wound faster than the particle style could dissolve it, a regeneration rate that outpaced even molecular disintegration. The shoulder regrew. The particle style became another solved equation. Mu was sealed by his own reanimated student before Naruto needed to engage further, the third Raikage, a man whose body was legendary for its durability, whose single attack and absolute defense had made him the strongest Kage of his era. Naruto fought him for 30 seconds, traded blows with a warrior whose lightning-enhanced armor was the closest thing to his own adaptive capability he'd ever encountered in another being. Respect existed in that exchange, a recognition between two bodies built for endurance. Naruto found the weakness, the single point on the Raikage's chest where his own technique could pierce his own defense, and drove the man's own arm into it during a grapple. The third Raikage was sealed with the respect of a worthy opponent acknowledged. Tamari fought on the same front. She commanded a mid-range division, 50 kunoichi and shinobi under her tactical direction, her fan sweeping battlefields clean of Zetsu clones in wind scythe arcs that turned 100 plant soldiers to confetti in single strokes. She was brilliant, efficient, a commander who understood that economy of force won wars, that a single, well-placed technique could accomplish what 100 panicked strikes could achieve. She fought 50 meters from Naruto's position for 3 continuous hours, their areas of operation overlapping in a coordination that required zero verbal communication, each of them aware of the other's position and movements through the kind of spatial awareness that only came from sparring together for years. In a break between waves, a 10-minute window where the Zetsu assault paused and the reanimated shinobi were being handled by sealing teams, she found him at the edge of the battlefield, covered in plant matter and ash, his body showing the fading marks of adaptations that had activated and resolved across a dozen separate engagements. "You look terrible," she said, wiping green Zetsu residue from her fan's blade. "I've been better decorated. We're winning this front." She surveyed the field, the scattered remains of 1,000 Zetsu clones, the sealed containers holding reanimated legends, the allied forces holding their position against what should have been an overwhelming tide. Whatever's coming next won't be more plant soldiers. "The 10 tails," Naruto said. "That's what comes next. He's been gathering the tailed beasts for a reason. When he has enough, he'll bring the original out." Tamari looked at him, studied his face, the amber-ringed eyes, the set of the jaw, the absolute absence of anxiety in his expression, despite discussing a threat that could end the world. She stepped closer, closing the distance between them until she stood in his immediate space, her armor pressing against his. "When that thing comes out," she said, "you're going to fight it, the way you fought the Shukaku. The Shukaku was 1 tail, this will be 10, and you'll fight it anyway. There's no one else who can." She put her hand on his chest, both heartbeats pulsed against her palm, steady, synchronized, carrying a rhythm that hadn't faltered since the day they developed. Her eyes held his. "Then fight it. Grow as big as you need to, become whatever it takes, but you come back to me after." Her grip tightened, fingertips pressing into the adaptive tissue beneath his skin with enough force to dimple the reinforced surface. "Promise me." "I promise," he said, and he meant it the way he meant every adaptation. Absolutely, irrevocably, written into his cellular architecture as a directive that superseded everything else. She kissed him, harder than the first time, longer, deeper, with the urgency of someone who understood that the next hours might bring something that even an unkillable body could find dangerous. When she pulled back, her eyes were fierce. "Now go end this war." He went. The 10 tails rose from the earth like a natural disaster given flesh. Its body defied biology. A single eye atop a mass of writhing tails, each one the size of a mountain, each one carrying enough destructive force to level a continent. Obito Uchiha stood atop its head. The masked man revealed, his identity confirmed, his Rinnegan and Sharingan combination powering the beast through a connection that gave him control of the greatest weapon in history. Behind him, manipulating from the shadows, Madara Uchiha, the original, reanimated through Edo Tensei, but carrying his own Rinnegan, his own plans, his own intention to claim the 10 tails for himself once the time was right. The Allied forces faltered at the sight of it. 80,000 shinobi, trained, coordinated, armed with every technique the 5 nations had produced across centuries of warfare, looked up at the 10 tails and felt what Sakura had felt in the Forest of Death against Orochimaru. The recognition of something so far above them on the chain of existence that their bodies simply wanted to stop functioning in its presence. Naruto walked toward it. His body was already responding, cells dividing, architecture expanding, the macro mutation from the Shukaku fight 3 years ago, pulling itself from the archive and beginning the scaling process. Bone plates emerged from his spine. His skin hardened into the black, interlocking exoskeleton. His height doubled, tripled, continued climbing as his body committed to the transformation that the 10 tails' existence demanded. He grew. Taller than trees, taller than buildings, taller than the cliff faces of the valley where they fought. His form took shape, the predatory silhouette from the Shukaku fight, but larger, denser, more refined. 3 years of additional adaptation had improved the blueprint. The exoskeleton was thicker, the scales more articulated, the claws longer and more structurally sound. His arms carried visible ridges of reinforced bone that served as both armor and edge weapons. His jaw extended into a structure designed for the kind of bite force that could puncture tailed beast hide. He reached the 10 tails' height and kept growing. Exceeded it. Towered above the ancient beast by 50 meters at full extension, while his body casting a shadow across the battlefield that covered the entire Allied forces line. 80,000 shinobi looked up at what their colleague had become. The silence was absolute. What moved in their chests was beyond fear or awe. It was the recognition that they were witnessing something outside the natural order. A human body that had decided to match a god in scale and succeeded. The 10 tails fired. Bijudama, a tailed beast bomb the size of a city block, condensed from raw chakra in proportions that could reduce mountains to craters. The sphere launched from the beast's maw and screamed toward Naruto at velocities that compressed the air ahead of it into a visible shockwave. He caught it. His massive clawed hands closed around the sphere, his exoskeleton cracking under the strain, his palms burning against the concentrated energy, and he held it. His body absorbed the energy through his skin, the same way it absorbed natural energy, the same way it absorbed everything. The Bijudama's power dissipated into his cellular structure and was converted, added to his reserves, fuel for the furnace that powered his impossibility. He threw the empty shell aside, a husk of spent energy that cratered the landscape without the devastation of its original payload, and charged. They collided with an impact that created a new geography. The shockwave flattened everything in a 2-kilometer radius, and the ground beneath their grappling form sank 6 meters as the bedrock compressed under their combined weight. Naruto's claws found purchase in the 10 tails' flesh, tearing through the beast's hide in furrows that would have been fatal wounds on anything with a normal biology. The 10 tails screamed, a sound that reached every ear on the continent, a cry of pain from something that hadn't felt threatened since the Sage of Six Paths had divided it a millennium ago. Obito responded from atop the beast's head. Wood-style techniques, branches erupting from the Ten-Tail's body toward Naruto in a forest of impaling spears. The Senju bloodline stolen through Hashirama cells, deployed at a scale matching the Ten-Tail's itself. The branches drove into Naruto's exoskeleton, finding seams between scales, punching through gaps in the armor. His body adapted mid-penetration. The tissue around each wound hardened, compressed, and began digesting the wood, breaking down the cellular material of the Hashirama-derived branches the same way his body had broken down every other foreign material it had ever encountered. The wood dissolved inside his flesh, absorbed, made into fuel. "Every time you strike me," Naruto said, and his voice at this scale was a geological event. A sound that came from a throat the size of a building, resonating at frequencies that cracked stone and shifted soil. "You only build a better monster." He tore the Ten-Tail's arm free of its body. A limb the size of a mountain range, ripped from the socket by raw adaptive strength, trailing tails of chakra and regenerating tissue that tried desperately to reconnect. He used it as a weapon, swung the severed limb into the beast's torso with enough force to drive the Ten-Tails backward across the landscape, its massive body carving a trench in the earth that would become a river in decades to come. Obito lost control. The Ten-Tails bucked, its single eye rolling, its tails thrashing wildly, and the masked man was thrown from its head, tumbling through the air toward the ground far below. The allied forces intercepted him, Kakashi and Guy and a dozen elite Jonin engaging the masked Uchiha in combat that pushed them to their limits but kept him separated from the beast. Naruto dismantled the Ten-Tails alone. Without its controller, the beast was an animal, immensely powerful but uncoordinated, its attacks driven by instinct rather than strategy. He avoided the tails, absorbed the Bijudama, tore through the regenerating flesh faster than it could rebuild. He reached the core, the dense mass of chakra at the beast's center that served as its heart, and drove his arm through it. His claws closed around something inside, a seal, a structure, the mechanism that held the tailed beast's combined essence in unity rather than allowing them to separate. He broke it. The Ten-Tails came apart, its body destabilized, the individual tailed beasts pulling free of the composite form, their separate identities reasserting as the binding seal failed. 9 distinct chakra signatures erupted outward from the collapsing mass, each one coalescing into an individual beast as it separated from the whole. The one tail through the 9 tails, free, confused, scattered across the battlefield as independent entities for the first time in eons. Naruto shrank as the 10 tails dissolved around him, his macro form receding now that the primary threat had been neutralized, his body returning to human scale with the practiced efficiency of something that had done this before. He landed on the scarred earth and found Madara Uchiha standing 50 meters away, watching the dissolution of the tails with an expression that belonged on a man watching his house burn down. The reanimated legend, white hair flowing, Rinnegan blazing, Susanoo flickering at the edges of his form, had planned to claim the Ten-Tails himself, had manipulated Obito as a pawn, had orchestrated decades of conflict to bring the beast together, had waited across death itself for this moment, and a 15-year-old boy had torn it apart with his bare hands. "Impressive," Madara said. His voice carried the weight of a century of warfare, of a lifetime spent as the strongest person in any room, of a pride that had survived death and resurrection without dimming. "You tore apart a god. I wonder if you can handle its predecessor." He absorbed what remained. Whatever fragment of the Ten-Tails chakra lingered in the atmosphere, whatever scraps were left after the separation, Madara drew into himself through the Rinnegan's gravitational pull. His body swelled with stolen power. His form shifted, a third eye opening on his forehead, horns pushing through his hairline, his already legendary chakra reserve expanding into something that approached divine. He became the Ten-Tails Jinchuriki through sheer force of will, claiming what Obito had failed to control. His Susanoo erupted, a construct of perfect chakra, enormous, towering, an avatar of destructive potential that dwarfed anything a normal Sharingan could produce. The four-armed warrior of ethereal energy swung a blade that split the atmosphere, creating a vacuum in its wake that pulled debris and oxygen along its trajectory. Naruto met it without growing large. His body had learned something from the Ten-Tails fight, a new solution for scale disparity that didn't require macro mutation. His exoskeleton deployed across his human-sized frame in its most refined configuration. Every scale a masterwork of composite material, every joint protected by interlocking bone ridges, every surface angled for deflection. He was smaller than the Susanoo by orders of magnitude, but he was also denser. Every cell of his body packed with more structural integrity than the ethereal construct could match per unit of force. He ran up the Susanoo's blade as it embedded in the ground, his feet finding purchase on the chakra surface through microscopic barbs that grew from his soles, and he punched through the avatar's chest. His arm, human-sized but carrying force that defied the square cube law, drove through layers of perfect Susanoo and found the man inside. His fist connected with Madara's ribs, and the Uchiha legend flew backward out of his own technique, the Susanoo dissolving as its user's concentration shattered. Madara landed on his feet. His third eye blazed. Limbo, invisible shadow clones that existed in a parallel dimension, undetectable by any normal sense. 4 of them, each carrying Madara's full combat capability. They attacked from angles Naruto couldn't see through normal vision. The first Limbo clone struck him from behind, a blow that actually staggered him, that actually drove him forward a step. Because the attack came from a dimensional axis his sensory architecture hadn't encountered before. But only once. His body registered the dimensional frequency of the Limbo realm. His sage-enhanced perception expanded in a direction that normal sensory organs had never been designed to perceive. A new set of receptors growing along his optic nerve, feeding data from an adjacent dimensional plane directly into his visual cortex. Within 3 seconds, he could see all 4 Limbo clones as clearly as he saw Madara's physical body. He destroyed them one at a time. Each one a single strike, his adapted perception tracking their movements, his enhanced speed matching their dimensional advantage. 4 clones fell in 4 seconds, dispersing back into the Limbo realm as disrupted energy. Madara's eyes widened. "You can see them. How can you see them?" "The same way I survive everything else," Naruto said, walking toward the greatest Uchiha who ever lived with the unhurried gait of something that already decided this fight's conclusion. "Your eyes show you the world as it was. Every technique copied, every moment recorded, every legacy preserved in amber. My body becomes the world as it must be. You look backward." He stopped 3 meters from Madara and let the Uchiha see what stood before him. The amber eyes glowing with sage power, the exoskeleton radiating an energy signature that exceeded the Ten Tails fragments Madara had absorbed. "I only look forward, and everything behind me is already solved." Madara attacked. Everything he had. Susanoo reformed around him at full power. Rinnegan techniques cycling through gravitational manipulation and elemental destruction and meteorite summoning. He pulled the sky down. 2 massive meteorites, each one the size of the Hokage monument, descended toward the battlefield, their entry heating the atmosphere into a friction inferno, their mass carrying enough kinetic energy to reshape the continent. Naruto looked up at the falling stars. His body's response was immediate. The macro mutation activating one more time, his frame expanding to match the scale of the incoming threat. He grew to meet the first meteorite and caught it, his hands pressing flat against a surface of molten rock kilometers in diameter, his adaptive tissue converting the thermal energy into reserve fuel, his legs driving into the ground like pillars supporting a bridge. He held the first meteorite, stopped its descent through brute structural force. Then he threw it, redirected it sideways with a motion that tore muscles and regrew them in the same motion, sending the rock mass spinning into the uninhabited wasteland to the east where it impacted and created a new lake of molten stone. The second meteorite hit him before he could redirect. It drove him into the ground, compressed him beneath a mountain's worth of celestial stone. The battlefield fell silent as 80,000 pairs of eyes watched the spot where their greatest asset had just been buried under a geological event. Madara landed beside the fallen meteorite and waited. His Rinnegan pierced the stone, searching for vital signs, searching for the confirmation that this finally had been sufficient. The meteorite cracked. A fissure ran along its surface, then another, then a dozen, then 100. The entire mass fragmented from within, blown apart by a force expanding outward from its center, and Naruto erupted from the rubble at his full macroform height. His exoskeleton was intact. His body had spent the 3 seconds of burial absorbing the kinetic energy of the impact and converting it to fuel for the breakout. A mountain had fallen on him, and he'd used it as a power source. He descended on Madara with the weight of his full form. The Susanoo rose to meet him, the four-armed avatar swinging all its blades simultaneously. Naruto caught 2 in his claws and shattered the other 2 with his tail. A appendage that had grown during the macro mutation, 10 meters of dense, armored tissue that moved with the speed of a whip and the force of a building collapse. His jaw opened and he bit down on the Susanoo's head, teeth puncturing the perfect chakra construct, cracking the ethereal armor that no physical force was supposed to breach. The Susanoo shattered. Madara fell from its collapsing interior, his body damaged, his Rinnegan flickering, the stolen ten-tail chakra depleting under the sustained assault. He hit the ground and tried to stand. Naruto's foot, at macro scale, a surface the size of a house, came down over him, pressed him into the earth with just enough force to immobilize without pulping. Held him there. The greatest Uchiha in history, pinned like an insect under glass, looking up at the soul of something that had outpaced every advantage his legendary eyes had ever given him. Naruto spoke. His voice at this scale was the sound of the world ending, deep enough to shake the mantle beneath the crust, resonant enough to be heard across the entire battlefield. Your dream of an infinite illusion required a world too afraid to fight back. He pressed down incrementally. Madara's ribs cracked. The Rinnegan stared upward with the naked disbelief of a man who had spent a century believing himself supreme. I am what happens when the world fights back and wins. He increased the pressure. Madara's Edo Tensei body, designed to be indestructible, designed to regenerate from any wound, cracked and compressed beneath a force that exceeded the technique's restoration threshold. The reanimation jutsu tried to rebuild what Naruto was destroying, but he was faster. He was always faster. The regeneration failed to keep pace with the destruction, and Madara Uchiha, the legend, the nightmare, the man whose name meant war across 5 nations, was ground to nothing beneath the weight of something that had simply grown beyond his capacity to threaten. The Edo Tensei released. The soul departed. Madara's remains scattered on the wind, and the reanimation technique's failure to sustain a body that had been destroyed beyond its tolerances sent the spirit to whatever waited on the other side. The greatest shinobi of the old world, gone. His eye of the moon, dead. His legacy of hatred and manipulation ended beneath the foot of a boy whose body answered every question with evolution. Naruto began to shrink. The macro form receded, the scales withdrew, and in 30 seconds he stood at human height on the scarred battlefield. The Allied forces were silent, every single one of them staring at the spot where a god-empowered legend had just been ground to paste by something that looked, on the surface, like a teenage boy with strange eyes. Then Kaguya arrived. The space between realities tore open above the battlefield. A dimensional rift, white and absolute, widened to admit a figure that shouldn't have existed in the modern world. Otsutsuki Kaguya, the rabbit goddess, the mother of chakra, the progenitor of the Sage of 6 Paths, a being that predated the shinobi system itself. She descended from the rift like snowfall, her white robes trailing, her third eye, the Rinne Sharingan, the true origin of every dojutsu that had followed. Opening on her forehead with the languid indifference of something that had slept for millennia, and expected the world to have improved in its absence, she looked at the battlefield, at the armies, at the scattered tailed beasts, at the spot where Madara had fallen. And her expression carried nothing. No anger, no surprise, no judgment, just the flat assessment of someone surveying property that had misbehaved in her absence. "My chakra," she said. Her voice filled the atmosphere without raising in volume, a harmonic that vibrated at the frequency of the natural world itself, because she had been the natural world's dominant organism before humanity existed. Scattered across your parasitic species for generations, it's time to reclaim what was given. Her hand moved. The air shifted. The ground beneath the Allied forces began to transform, roots erupting from the earth, divine tree matter consuming the landscape, attempting to cocoon every living thing in parasitic shells that would drain their chakra and return it to the goddess who considered it stolen property. Naruto moved before the roots reached the first soldier. His body erupted into motion, crossing the battlefield at sage-enhanced speed, his hands tearing roots from the ground as they emerged, his feet cratering earth as he ran interference between Kaguya's technique and the army it was trying to consume. He bought time, seconds only, while 80,000 shinobi began their retreat from a threat none of them could face. Then he turned toward her. The rabbit goddess looked down at him from her floating position above the battlefield, and her Rinne Sharingan focused on his form. She saw what the others saw, a human-sized figure, densely packed, carrying more adaptive architecture than any organism she'd encountered in her long existence. Her head tilted, fractional, curious, the first expression that could be read as interest since her emergence. "You are different," she observed. "Your cells, they consume, they adapt, they overcome." Her third eye narrowed. "You are a parasite that learned to evolve in real time. Interesting." "You are an alien that crashed on a planet and called herself a goddess," Naruto replied. His voice carried across the distance between them, that low, grinding register that made air vibrate and stone crack. "I'm going to solve you the same way I solved everything else." "You cannot solve divinity, child. Divinity is just a biological system that hasn't been pressured yet." He set his stance. His body began its preparation, every archived adaptation rising to readiness, every mutation he'd ever earned cycling through his cells like ammunition being loaded into 1,000 chambers simultaneously. "Allow me to apply the pressure." She attacked. Tomogoroshi no Haikotsu, all-killing ash bones, projectiles of pure disintegration, bone fragments that reduced anything they touched to ash at the atomic level, unmade matter itself through contact, ended existence in the most absolute sense possible. She fired 6. Each one screamed toward Naruto at speeds that exceeded anything the human eye could track. He dodged 5. The 6th grazed his left hand, 3 fingers dissolving into nothing, the ring and pinky and middle finger simply ceasing to exist as the ash bone passed through them. The technique was absolute. There was nothing to adapt against, because there was nothing left to analyze. Dissolution at the atomic level left no data, no trauma, no wound to learn from, only absence. Naruto looked at his hand. 3 fingers gone. His body attempted to regenerate them and succeeded, new fingers growing from the stumps in 2 seconds, fresh bone and tissue emerging from nothing. But the adaptation failed to address the attack itself. His cells could rebuild what was destroyed, but they hadn't developed a counter to the mechanism of destruction. The ash bones remained lethal, a problem, a genuine, novel problem, the first true threat to his existence since the warehouse at age 7. His mind worked faster. His evolutionary engine engaged at a depth it hadn't accessed since the original adaptation event, the deepest layer of his cellular intelligence. The core that had turned a dying child into an unkillable predator, the source code of his impossibility. The problem was clear. The ash bones unmade matter on contact. No amount of armor or density or reinforcement could survive contact because the mechanism didn't damage, it erased. The solution couldn't be defensive. It had to be structural. His cells found the answer in 3 seconds. The tissue of his body began to shift, a transformation subtler than any previous adaptation, deeper than scales or exoskeletons or bone armor. His cellular structure rewrote itself at the subatomic level. The bonds between his atoms strengthened, not through density or material hardness, but through a fundamental alteration of the energy that held his matter together. His cells became more real, more present, more stubbornly existent than normal matter had any right to be. The atomic dissolution technique required a threshold of energy to function, a minimum amount of unmake force per atom to trigger the collapse cascade. Naruto's atoms now exceeded that threshold. His matter resisted erasure the way a mountain resists being moved by wind, through sheer absolute mass of existence. The next ash bone hit him in the chest. It didn't dissolve. It shattered against his sternum like glass against steel, the dissolution field breaking apart against matter that refused to be unmade. The fragments fell to the ground as inert powder, their killing force spent against something that had decided, at the most fundamental level of reality, that it would continue to exist, Kaguya's expression changed. For the first time since her emergence, for the first time in millennia, something registered on that ageless face that resembled genuine surprise. "Impossible," she said. "My ash bones dissolve all matter, all matter." "Mine is better matter," Naruto said, and he launched himself toward her. She shifted dimensions. The world changed around them, the battlefield vanishing, replaced by a landscape of ice that extended to every horizon. An alternate dimension, one of many she could access through her Rinne Sharingan. She'd moved the fight to her territory, a space where she controlled the rules of reality, where gravity and distance and the fundamental constants of physics bent to her will. The temperature plummeted to absolute zero. The air froze solid in Naruto's lungs. His body generated heat. The internal furnace that had melted Haku's ice mirrors at 12 ignited at 1,000 times its former output, his cells burning sage energy like a star burns hydrogen, producing enough thermal radiation to melt a path through the frozen atmosphere around him. He existed in a bubble of liquid air surrounded by walls of solid nitrogen and oxygen, and he pressed forward through the frozen dimension toward the goddess who'd created it. She shifted again. The ice world vanished, replaced by a dimension of crushing gravity where every square centimeter of surface pressed downward with force sufficient to flatten steel to foil. Naruto's body compressed, his spine shortening, his joints straining, his organs pressing against each other in a cage of bone that was already adapting. His skeletal structure thickened. His cartilage multiplied. His muscular system redeveloped in a configuration designed for high-gravity operation, each fiber shortened and thickened, and packed with enough contractile force to move against pressures that would immobilize a tank. He stood upright in the crushing dimension and walked toward her with steps that cracked the super-dense floor beneath him. She shifted again. A dimension of acid, the atmosphere itself corrosive, eating through everything organic. His skin developed the neutralizing layer he'd grown against Orochimaru's venom, expanded to cover every pore, every opening, every surface that contacted the caustic air. The acid dimension failed to touch him. Again, a dimension of sensory overload, light at blinding intensity, sound at frequencies designed to rupture eardrums and liquefy brain tissue. His eyes developed filters, his eardrums thickened, his brain added secondary processing centers to handle the input overload. He functioned without discomfort again, again, again. Kaguya cycled through dimension after dimension, each one designed as a kill box, each one carrying an environmental extreme meant to destroy anything that entered it. Naruto walked through every single one. His body answered each dimension with a new adaptation, each adaptation arriving faster than the last, as his evolutionary engine recognized the pattern. Environmental extremes, novel stimuli, problems to solve. This was what he did. This was what he was. She could shift him through 1,000 dimensions, and he would walk through each one like an explorer cataloging new terrain. She stopped shifting. They stood in a void, a dimensionless space, white and empty, carrying nothing except the two of them and the distance between them. Kaguya floated 10 meters above him, her robes trailing in a wind that didn't exist, her Rinne Sharingan blazing with the full power of an existence that predated the elemental nations by epochs. She was ancient. She was powerful beyond measurement. She had birthed the entire shinobi system from her own body, and she was losing. "What are you?" she asked, and her voice carried something it hadn't carried since her own sons had sealed her away millennia ago. Something fragile. Something afraid. Naruto looked up at her. His body stood in the void, human-sized, human-shaped, carrying the accumulated adaptations of a lifetime inside every cell. He wasn't large. He wasn't transformed. He looked like what he was, a teenager built lean and dense, with amber-ringed eyes and adaptive tissue beneath unremarkable skin. But the pressure he exuded filled the dimensionless space between them with a weight that made the goddess above him flinch. "You're an alien organism," he said. "You consumed a fruit. You gained power. You declared yourself divine because nothing on this planet could challenge you." His voice dropped lower, into the frequencies that made reality itself take notice. "I am what this planet eventually grew to answer you. I am the adaptive response to a foreign body that overstayed its welcome. I am the immune system of a world that got tired of being sick." He jumped. The void offered no gravity to assist and none to resist. His legs simply propelled him upward through empty space, his body rising toward the goddess with the irresistible momentum of something that had never been stopped. Kaguya fired ash bones, a barrage, dozens of them, a wall of atomic dissolution screaming downward to meet his ascent. They shattered against his body like thrown chalk. His enhanced matter rejected them absolutely, his atoms too stubbornly real for the dissolution cascade to trigger. He reached her. His hand closed around her wrist, the first physical contact between them, his adaptive tissue meeting her divine flesh for the first time. The contact point burned. Her body radiated a frequency of chakra that was different from anything he'd encountered. Older, denser, carrying the weight of millennia, and the potency of a fruit that had grown from a god tree that fed on planets. His skin blistered where he gripped her. He held on anyway. His cells analyzed the divine chakra. Began the process of isolation, deconstruction, and integration. The blisters healed. His tissue rewrote itself against her frequency, learned it, understood it, began to produce its own version of it. Her power became data. Her divinity became input. Her existence became just another biological system for his cells to solve. "You are flesh," Naruto said, and his grip tightened until the bones of her wrist ground together. "You are cells and chakra and tissue arranged in a pattern, a complex pattern, an old pattern, but a pattern my body can read." His other hand came up and seized her shoulder, pulling her close, bringing her Rena Sharingan eye level with his own sage amber gaze. "And I solve patterns." His body erupted with sealing energy. Deep within his cells, in the place where the QB seal had always lived, where the architecture of the fourth Hokage's masterwork had constrained a tailed beast for 15 years, a new seal matrix activated. One his cells had constructed from the fragments of sealing knowledge his body had absorbed across every encounter. The five-pronged seal Orochimaru had tried to apply, the cursed seal his immune system had consumed, the extraction matrix he'd broken to free Gaara, the binding technique that held Edo Tensei bodies together. Every sealing technique he'd ever been exposed to, his body had cataloged them all, understood their architecture, and synthesized something new from their combined principles. An adaptive seal. A prison that rewrote itself in response to its prisoners' escape attempts. A cage built by the same evolutionary intelligence that had kept Naruto alive since age 7. The seal deployed through physical contact. It spread from Naruto's palms into Kaguya's body. Black markings cascading across her white skin like ink dropped in water, covering her arms, her torso, her face, sealing every chakra pathway, every dimensional portal, every trace of the power that made her a goddess rather than a mortal. She screamed. The sound split the void, a howl of rage and loss in the cosmic disbelief of a being that had never imagined its power could be taken rather than given. "You cannot," she gasped. "I am the origin. I am the source. I am." "You are sealed," Naruto said. The void collapsed. Reality reasserted itself, the battlefield returning, the sky filling in above them, the earth solidifying beneath their feet as the dimensional construct failed with its creator's power suppressed. They appeared in midair above the allied forces. Naruto holding a goddess by the wrist, the goddess covered in sealing marks that dimmed her Rene Sharingan to a guttering ember, the dimensional rifts closing one by one across the sky like wounds healing in the atmosphere. They fell. Naruto twisted in the air, placing his body beneath Kaguya's descent to absorb the impact, and they hit the ground in a crater that threw dust 100 meters high. When the debris settled, Naruto stood at the center, holding an unconscious Otsutsuki, her power sealed, her consciousness fading, her body human-sized and human-weak without the chakra that had made her transcendent. He laid her on the ground. The seal would hold. His cells maintained it the way they maintained every adaptation, continuously, unconsciously, an immune response that would never stop working because his body would never stop evolving to keep pace with whatever escape attempts she might devise from within. The war was over. 80,000 shinobi stood on a battlefield that looked like the aftermath of a continental collision, and they stared at the boy who had killed a legend, sealed a goddess, and ended a global conflict through the simple, unstoppable process of being better than everything that tried to destroy him. The five Kage stood at the front of the allied forces, each of them carrying wounds, each of them exhausted, each of them looking at Naruto with the shared understanding that the world had changed beneath their feet, and the boy at its center was the reason why. The silence lasted 10 seconds. Then Gaara raised his fist, the Kazekage, standing with his sand swirling weakly around him, saluting the person who had saved him twice and saved the world once. Temari was next, her fan planted in the ground beside her, her arm raised, her voice cutting through the silence with a sound that might have been his name, or might have been a war cry, or might have been both. The army followed. 80,000 voices, tired, wounded, grateful beyond the capacity of language to express, raised in a roar that shook what remained of the landscape. They cheered for Naruto Uzumaki, for the thing that had grown from a damaged boy in a warehouse to the absolute pinnacle of biological potential, for the monster that had chosen to protect them instead of consume them. Naruto stood in the center of their noise and felt nothing except the heartbeat that mattered, somewhere in that crowd, steady and strong, and beating with a frequency he'd memorized years ago. He found her. Temari was running toward him across the scarred earth, her war gear damaged, her face carrying 3 days of combat grime and blood from a cut above her eyebrow, her expression carrying nothing except the desperate urgency of someone who'd watched a person they love fight a god and needs physical confirmation that they're still whole. She hit him at full speed, her arms locked around his torso and her face pressed against his chest, over both heartbeats, feeling them pulse beneath her cheek, confirming life through contact. He let his arms close around her, let himself hold something fragile with hands that had just sealed a goddess, let himself feel the warmth of her body against his, without analyzing it as data or cataloging it as stimulus. Just warmth, just her. Just the one thing his adaptive arsenal had never needed to protect him from because it had never been an attack. "You came back," she said into his chest. "I promised. You sealed a god." She was just another problem. Temari pulled back enough to look up at his face. Her eyes were wet, which she would deny later, which she would never mention, and her hands came up to frame his jaw, thumbs tracing the hard lines of his bone structure, fingers pressing into the adaptive tissue that was softer now than it had been an hour ago, because his body recognized her touch as the opposite of threat and responded accordingly. "Marry me," she said. The word landed in his chest with more force than any Bijudama, any Shinra Tensei, any meteorite drop or ashbone barrage. His cells had no counter for it. His adaptive architecture had no response protocol. For the first time in his life, something had hit him that his body didn't instinctively want to defend against. "Yes," he said, simple, absolute, irrevocable, written into his cellular architecture the same way every adaptation was written, permanently, without possibility of reversal. Her smile split her face open, the widest expression he'd ever seen her wear, all teeth and challenge, and the fierce joy of a woman who just claimed something the entire world had failed to conquer. She pulled him down by the jaw and kissed him in front of 80,000 soldiers, 5 Kaj, 9 tailed beasts, and whatever was left of the gods watching from above. The kiss lasted longer than any combat engagement he'd survived. He didn't want it to end. The weeks that followed were reconstruction. The elemental nations, scarred, diminished, exhausted from a war that had reshaped their landscape and killed thousands of their best, began the long process of rebuilding. Konoha's crater from Pain's invasion was still being filled when the war damage assessment teams added the new destruction from the Ten Tails battle to their renovation plans. The 5 Kage signed a lasting peace accord, not out of idealism, but out of the practical recognition that the world had barely survived Unity's challenge and would certainly fall to divisions. Borders opened. Trade resumed. The wartime alliance solidified into something permanent. Gaara officiated the wedding. The Kazekage stood between Naruto and Temari in the courtyard of Suna's administrative center, his home, her home, the village whose walls she defended and whose interests she'd served across every negotiation table and battlefield the alliance had required. The ceremony was small. Kakashi was there, wearing his usual mask and his unusual smile, visible in the single eye above the fabric. Sakura attended, carrying the warmth of someone genuinely happy for a person she'd long since given up competing with. Shikamaru stood at Tamari's side as her witness, his lazy posture betraying genuine affection for the woman who'd beaten him in their first encounter and never stopped exceeding his expectations. Naruto wore civilian clothes, the first time in years he'd worn anything that wasn't built for combat readiness. The fabric sat strangely on his frame, too soft, too vulnerable. But Tamari had asked, and her asks were the one force in the universe that bypassed his defensive instincts entirely. The vows were brief. Neither of them were people who wasted words on ceremony. Gaara asked the questions. Tamari answered with the same fierce certainty she brought to everything, an absolute commitment delivered like a challenge to the universe. I will. Try to stop me. Naruto answered with a single word, always. The ring went on her finger and the world continued turning, unchanged by the ceremony, but permanently altered by the fact that two immovable forces had chosen to stand together rather than alone. That night, in the quarters Gaara had assigned them, a room with wide windows open to the desert air, Tamari lay against his side and traced patterns on his chest, over the twin heartbeats, over the faint texture of subdermal plating, over the place where Sasuke's Chidori had once punched through and found that even death was temporary for the body it lived in. Was there ever a point, she asked into the warm silence between them, where you thought you might actually die? In any of it? The warehouse, the valley, pain, the 10 tails, Kaguya, any of it? He considered the question with the honesty she deserved, reviewed every encounter, every wound, every moment where his body had been pushed to its absolute limit and found another gear beyond it. The warehouse at 7, the Chidori through his chest, the ash bone dissolving his fingers. Each one had carried for a fractional second the possibility of permanence. 3 times, he said. The warehouse, before the first adaptation triggered, before I understood what I was. That was real death approaching, and something inside me refused it. The Chidori at the valley, for the time between my primary heart stopping and my secondary starting, I was technically dead. A second and a half of genuine absence. He paused. And Kaguya's ash bones. The first one dissolved my fingers and I had nothing to counter it. For 3 seconds I was vulnerable. 3 seconds of vulnerability across 8 years of being unkillable. She pressed her palm flat against his chest. And in those 3 seconds, did you feel afraid? He turned his head to look at her. The amber-ringed eyes, glowing faintly in the darkness, sage energy cycling through him even at rest, met hers with an expression that was, for once, completely unguarded. Only of leaving you behind, he said. The dying itself was irrelevant. Dying without keeping my promise to you, that was the fear. She was silent for a moment. Her heartbeat quickened against his side, a rhythm his body read as emotion rather than exertion, while cataloged as love rather than threat, filed in the place where his warmest data lived. She pressed her lips against his collarbone and said nothing else, and the silence between them was the comfortable kind. The kind that needed no filling, the kind that existed between two people who had nothing left to prove to each other or the world. They built a life, split between Konoha and Suna, 2 villages, 2 homes, 2 sets of responsibilities that they balanced with the same efficiency they'd brought to warfare. Tamari maintained her role as Suna's chief diplomat, carrying her fan and her authority across every negotiation with the casual confidence of someone who could level a city block and chose to build treaties instead. Naruto accepted a position he'd never sought. Konoha's head of defense, a role that required him to exist as the village's ultimate deterrent against any threat, foreign or domestic, that might arise in the fragile peace the war had purchased. He trained still. Every morning, new environments, new stimuli, new challenges for a body that craved the input of genuine difficulty. But the urgency had changed. He was optimizing now rather than surviving, refining rather than scrambling, improving for the sake of completeness rather than in response to lethal necessity. His body continued to evolve. New adaptations emerged from new stimuli, each one smaller and more specialized than the massive mutations of his combat career. He developed the ability to communicate with plant life through chemical signaling. He grew a secondary digestive system capable of breaking down mineral matter for direct skeletal integration. His brain developed additional processing centers that allowed parallel thought streams, a mind operating on multiple simultaneous tracks of analysis, each one handling a different input, each one contributing to a total awareness that approached omniscience within his sensory range. He was, by any measure that mattered, the most powerful organism that had ever existed on the planet. And every morning, he woke beside a woman who looked at him, at all of it, at the impossibility and the monstrosity and the absolute apex of adaptive evolution, and saw a person she'd chosen, a partner, a husband who ran too hot in his sleep because his metabolism never fully powered down, who left scale-textured handprints on the bed sheets when he stretched in the morning, who held her with arms that could crack mountains and touched her like she was the fragile one when they both knew she was anything but. A year after the war's end, Tamari told him she was pregnant. She delivered the news with the same blunt certainty she brought to everything, standing in their kitchen in Konoha, one hand on her hip, the other holding the medical report from Sakura's examination. "Your genetics are insane," Tamari said. "Sakura says the cellular structure is already different from baseline human. The kid's gonna be something." Naruto took the report. Read it. His analytical mind processed the data, the elevated cell division rates, the unusual protein structures, the preliminary indicators of an adaptive capability embedded at the genetic level. His child would carry some version of his ability, modified, diluted perhaps, but present. The implications were vast. He set the report down, looked at Tamari, at the barely visible roundness just beginning to show, at the way she held herself with the same unbroken posture she'd carried since the day they'd met. His hand moved to rest against her abdomen, palm flat, sage-enhanced senses detecting the second heartbeat beneath her skin. Tiny, rapid, already carrying a cellular architecture that was as much miracle as biology. "Something," he repeated. His mouth moved in the expression she'd learned to read as a smile, the one that lived in the jaw and the eyes rather than the lips. "Something sounds about right." She put her hand over his. Their combined pressure, her strength and his, rested against the life between them, and the moment carried a weight that exceeded anything the battlefield had ever produced. This was creation rather than destruction, growth rather than survival, a future rather than an endless present of adaptation against threat. They stood in their kitchen in the afternoon light, two forces that had refused to bend through a war and a world, and the silence between them was the kind that contained everything. Every fight, every scar, every stolen moment on rooftops and battlefields, and in the spaces between catastrophes that had eventually, finally, added up to this. A life shared, a child coming, a peace earned through the absolute certainty that nothing in the universe could break what they'd built, because the people who built it had never been broken by anything. Naruto looked at the woman beside him, at the life ahead, at the world beyond their window. A world, well, finally at peace because he existed in it, and everything that threatened that peace knew what he would become if they pushed him. He felt his cells hum beneath his skin, the endless adaptive intelligence that had saved him and shaped him, and turned him from a dying boy in a warehouse into the single greatest force the shinobi world had ever produced. It was quiet now, resting, waiting, as it always waited, for the next thing that might try to test him. But looking at Tamari, at her strength, at her warmth, at the life they'd made together, he suspected the next test worth his attention had already arrived, and it would require a kind of growth his body had never attempted before, the kind that couldn't be forced through trauma, the kind that came from choosing, every day, to be something gentler than what he'd been built for. The hardest adaptation of all, he was ready to try. The evening settled over Konoha like a held breath, and two heartbeats in his chest kept time with the one beneath Tamari's palm, and the world held still around them, in the particular way it holds still when something permanent has been decided, when two forces that could never be broken chose instead to build something worth protecting, and the universe, for once, had the good sense to stay out of their way.
Thanks for watching this epic full story. Naruto's unbreakable journey from tragedy to absolute dominance was insane. If you enjoyed it, subscribe for more powerful what-if anime stories. Hit the like button and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. See you in the next adventure.